From the humble beginnings of the original iPhone in 2007 to the bold cosmic orange iPhone 17 Pro of 2025, Apple's iPhone line has come a long way over the years. And we've seen a lot of great iPhones in that time, but there being this many iPhones, one has to ask the question, what is the best iPhone ever?
In 2007, iPhone reinvented what we think of as a phone. It's hard to remember what it was like before iPhone.
Hey, how's it going? I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and about 7 years and 18 iPhones ago, I made this exact same video, and it did okay. There were only 16 iPhones back then, and there's 34 today, and that's counting phones like the 6 and 6 Plus as just a single model. So I think it's fair to say this subject warrants revisiting. I mean, surely the results will be different this time, right? Last year we did a video on the worst iPhone ever, and this video is going to follow the same pattern. We're gonna go through each and every single one of the 34 iPhones, highlighting their strengths and weaknesses, and whether or not they could potentially be considered the best iPhone of all time. At which point in round 2, we will narrow them down even further before crowning the ultimate winner. And just to keep things interesting, we'll do a tier list as we go along. Our criteria is going to vary a lot. We're going to consider things like innovation, overall value, longevity of the phone, and of course, best is a relative term. The iPhone 17 Pro is technically the best iPhone ever, in that it's like the fastest and has the best cameras, but is it really better than something like the iPhone 4? It's not an apples to apples comparison, but I guess it also kind of is. So before we get started, make sure to leave a comment down below with what you think is the best iPhone ever. Obviously, a lot of this is going to come down to personal opinions, so if you disagree with me, don't worry. You're allowed to be wrong. But without further ado, let's just get into this because we have 34 iPhones to talk about for round 1 alone. Oh boy, all right, let's start.
An iPod. A phone. Are you getting it?
January 2007, Steve Jobs would take to the stage to announce iPhone, a product so innovative that even Jobs himself could never imagine how impactful it would be in fundamentally shifting and shaping society over the next 2 decades.
And here it is.
If this video was titled, "What is the best smartphone ever?", the iPhone would have to win, because everything we have today still more or less follows the foundation laid by this singular device. Smartphones existed before iPhone, but this is what made them into the devices we know today. Still, this video isn't about smartphones as a whole, it's about iPhones, and as such we need to judge this phone accordingly relative to how it stands up to future models. It's difficult to determine just how much credit we should give this first generation for the innovation brought, especially when many aspects didn't age all that well, and it was flawed to begin with a relatively expensive price tag and only 2G networking, which for 2007 wasn't so great, hence why this phone is typically referred to in retrospect as the iPhone 2G. Even so, the first iPhone absolutely could and should be argued to be one of, if not the best iPhones ever made. And as such, it is going to make it onto the next round. So we're not putting it on the tier list yet, we'll talk about it again later on, and for now, let's continue to see which other iPhones it'll be competing with. Released July 2008, the second iPhone was critical for Apple's new product line to grow in market share and be able to appeal to more customers. The iPhone 3G aimed to fix the 2 major problems the first iPhone suffered from: the price points and the lack of 3G networking. Hence, the all-new glossy plastic build, helping that price get all the way down to $200 on contract. And as the name would imply, this phone did in fact bring 3G networking as well as GPS capabilities. Unfortunately, beyond the redesign and networking upgrades, the iPhone 3G wasn't really a whole lot different from the first iPhone, with much of the internal hardware, like the processor and camera, being directly carried over. Plus, it could be argued the design was a downgrade, even if it did get the price down. The App Store hitting with iPhone OS 2 was incredibly important, but the iPhone 3G would ultimately only get updates to iOS 4, and would be painfully slow on its final versions of software. Possibly the worst performing iPhone on its final version ever, and because of that, there's no way this could be considered one of the best iPhones. I think it fits in D tier just for how unpleasant the experience became on later software versions. June 2009, Apple would release the iPhone 3GS, the first S-model iPhone with the letter purported to stand for speed. This phone was practically the inverse upgrade compared to its predecessor. It featured an identical design to the 3G, but overhauled basically all of the internal hardware. Speeds were doubled, which allowed for far better performance, and new features like voice control, a digital compass, and video recording with that upgraded 3-megapixel camera. Yeah, you couldn't record video on the first 2 iPhones, at least without jailbreaking. The phone shipped with iPhone OS 3 and would get updates all the way way to iOS 6.1.6 in early 2014, about 6 months after iOS 7 launched. While it might have felt like a bummer for users at the time not to get that new flashy software version, it turned out to be a blessing in disguise, as the iPhone 4 had slowed down significantly on iOS 7 and struggled to keep up with all the new transparency and flashy animations throughout the OS, whereas the iPhone 3GS on iOS 6 is still, even to this day, surprisingly spiffy. It's impressive. The iPhone 3GS was in many ways the perfect S-model iPhone, but it's not the best iPhone ever. It is still a great device though, and I think it fits solidly in B tier if only for its longevity.
For 2010, we're going to take the biggest leap since the original iPhone.
The final iPhone to be announced on stage by Steve Jobs, the iPhone 4 was incredible, bringing a wholly new, gorgeous design, Apple Silicon with the A4 chip, an upgraded 5-megapixel rear camera, plus a new front-facing camera and FaceTime, the sharp Retina display that still holds up today. This was about the perfect phone for 2010, and while there were some major problems when it came to the antenna placement, this still easily could in fact be the best iPhone ever made. So because of that, we'll put the iPhone 4 aside for now and discuss it in the next round. One thing that plagued the iPhone 4 and the media buzz surrounding its launch was the egregious amount of leaks, and they drove Steve Jobs up the wall.
Now, stop me if you've already seen this.
Perhaps things would have gone differently had Steve Jobs only used today's sponsor, Incogni. I mean, probably not, because an Apple employee literally left an iPhone 4 prototype at a bar. But if your own personal data ends up somewhere it shouldn't be, Incogni is here to help. There are hundreds of companies that are constantly collecting, packaging, and selling your personal information online. Everything from your name, your email, your home address, your phone number, to even just your online shopping habits, and potentially much worse. All those spam emails you keep getting? Yeah, good shot it's thanks to these so-called data brokers. Scams, identity theft, even stalking. They all start with the buying and selling of your personal information. And that's where Incogni comes in to save the day going to war on your behalf. After you sign up and give one-time authorization, Incogni's team automatically contacts hundreds of these sites that have collated and sold your data without your consent, and they send demands that they delete all of your data repeatedly so it stays gone forever. And with the custom removals feature, you can send the link of any sketchy website that might be hosting your data to Incogni, and they'll take care of the rest. It's about as straightforward as it gets. If your personal data is out there to be found, and trust me, it is, Incogni is here to find and remove it. So to take back control of your digital footprint, go to incogni.com/91tech, which is the top link in the description, and use code 91tech for 60% off an annual plan. Seriously, this is an awesome service, and it is a really good idea to keep your private information actually private. So again, top link in the description, code 91tech for 60% off. Huge thank you to Incogni for sponsoring this video. It's a big help. And without further ado, let's get right back into this. I mean, we only have another 30 iPhones to discuss for round one. Ooh boy, maybe grab some popcorn too. This could take a bit. Announced the day before Steve Jobs passed on October 4th, 2011, the iPhone 4S was to many people at the time quite disappointing. It had the exact same 3.5-inch glass and stainless steel design of the iPhone 4, but like with the 3GS, it was the changes on the inside that counted, along with the introduction of Siri, which was a huge step in pushing the concept of artificial intelligence into the mainstream. An 8-megapixel camera with 1080p video recording, and the dual-core A5 chipset were the headlining improvements, and with iOS 5 would come an overhaul to the software, bringing extremely important features like the notification center, reminders, iMessage, iCloud, and there was also Twitter integration, which feels a bit amusing looking back. Siri was the big new fancy feature though, and sadly this was probably when Apple was at their best in the personal assistant game relative to the rest of the smartphone market. Siri was far more robust than the previous voice control features, and while this wasn't AI in the same way that exists today with things like ChatGPT, it was still very impressive tech for 2011. Despite being a solid upgrade over the iPhone 4, the 4S would ultimately age quite poorly. It received major software updates all the way to iOS 9, but it ran like absolute garbage on anything past iOS 7. iOS 8 was already really slow, but for some reason, and we'll see the reason in a sec, Apple gave it iOS 9 anyway. And like every other device with the A5 chipset, the iPhone 4S and its 512 megabytes of RAM simply could not keep up with the 2015 to 2016 level software. It, along with the iPhone 3G, are still the slowest iPhones on their final versions even to this day, and the phone is hurt further or buy an 8GB budget model released in 2013 that would run out of storage far too quickly. An 8GB 4S on iOS 9 has to be one of the worst experiences you could have on any iPhone, period. The real reason that the 4S got iOS 9 was no doubt because Apple was still producing the phone for developing markets until February 2016. They were making the phone for almost 5 years, so basically they screwed over their user base for money. So no, the iPhone 4S is not the best iPhone ever, even if it did have a lot of good, at least initially. I'm gonna throw it in C tier, dragged down purely by how poorly it aged.
So, iPhone 5. It is made entirely of glass and aluminum.
Coming fall 2012, the iPhone 5 was the first to increase the display size to a very comfortable 4 inches at a 16:9 ratio, bringing this gorgeous all-new glass and aluminum design, upgraded specs and a 4G LTE, and of course the Lightning port, which was a huge upgrade over the wide 30-pin port of old. The iPhone 5 ran iOS 6, the final version of iOS with the older skeuomorphic design, which always gives the phone huge points for me, at least in the nostalgia department. There was a lot to love with the iPhone 5, and unlike the 4S, it actually ran its final version in iOS 10 pretty well, all things considered. And I mean, let's be real, that design alone makes the phone deserving of moving on to the next round, and it absolutely could be argued to be the best iPhone ever. One of 2 iPhones to release in 2013, the iPhone 5C was Apple's first attempt at making a dedicated budget iPhone. Previously, they had simply reduced the price of older iPhones and maybe lowered the amount of storage, but the 5C was attempting something new. We had a colorful polycarbonate build, aka plastic. A plastic iPhone in 2013 from Apple, a company that presented itself as a luxury brand. Plastic was something we would see from Samsung, not iPhone. But there was a lot of potential here, and a cheaper build wouldn't matter if the value made up for it. But it didn't. The 5C was only $100 less than the next iPhone we'll talk about, and changed practically nothing from the iPhone 5, with the same specs, the same camera, no Touch ID, except, you know, the 5C is plastic, and thus cheaper for Apple to produce. And at the same price the iPhone 5 would have been, had it not been discontinued altogether, yeah, the 5C didn't look so good. The iPhone 5C is an iPhone that had so much potential, and Apple just butchered it. And as a result, it didn't sell all that well, at least relative to Apple's expectations, and they would end up with an abundant inventory that took a very long time to clear. The 5C would get to iOS 10 just like the iPhone 5, whereas the next phone we'll talk about got to iOS 12, and again was only $100 more in 2013, so it made for a far better investment. While the 5C never really got slow, there was of course an 8GB model that came out in 2014 and would be sold until late 2015, unless you're in India, where it was sold until February 2016. 8GB in 2016, there is no excuse for that whatsoever. The 5C easily gets F tier. In spite of everything, I do still love this phone, by the way, and it was actually the first iPhone I purchased for myself when I was, I think 14. So I do have a soft spot for it, especially that blue. The yellow one here was actually my dad's old 5C as well. And I appreciate how much work went into the design, but ultimately F tier is very deserved.
The 5S is the most forward-thinking phone we've ever created. In fact, perhaps the most forward-thinking phone anyone has ever made.
Then, also from fall 2013, we have the iPhone 5S, and it makes it onto the next round. Okay, I'm joking, but the 5S is absolutely a contender for the best iPhone ever. The biggest shot against it is that, like every other S model iPhone, it more or less reused the same design from the prior year. And, you know, some users were eager for an iPhone phablet, which this definitely wasn't. But with Touch ID, the first 64-bit chipset in any smartphone in the A7, a redesigned iOS 7 that brought integral features like the control center and AirDrop, plus that new gold color, already this iPhone is one of the best ever. Add in the fact that it got 6 major software versions from iOS 7 all the way to iOS 12, and it actually performs well, even on that final version. Yeah, the 5S moves on, and we'll be revisiting its greatness in the next round.
Today, we are launching the biggest advancement in the history of iPhone.
Released fall 2014, the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus brought Apple into the age of phablets with their much larger 4.7 and 5.5-inch displays, along with a refreshed, thin, curved aluminum design and plastic antenna bands stretching across the back. These phones to this day remain the best-selling smartphones of all time, with over 220 million units shipped, and that's despite numerous hardware issues and a propensity for bending. But we finally had a big iPhone, and that was a big deal. There's a reason it sold so well. There's plenty to criticize here, but there's also so much to love. And we'll be talking about all of that in the next round, as I feel like this is too important an iPhone to not be arguably the best of all time. This phone also did make it to round 2 of my worst iPhone ever video, by the way. I think this will be the only phone to make it to round 2 in both videos. Kind of funny how that pans out. It's just got some of the highest highs and lowest lows of any iPhone Apple has ever made, but we'll take a closer look in a while.
What we have to show you today is really awesome. And while they may look familiar, we have changed everything about these new iPhones.
Released 2015, the iPhone 6s and 6s Plus would correct a lot of the errors from its predecessor, with a strong aluminum build and big jumps in processing power and photography, including a 12-megapixel camera and 4K video recording. The phone brought faster second-gen Touch ID, a fun new feature in 3D Touch, and would end up receiving 7 major software updates from iOS 9 all the way to iOS 15. Heck, its latest security update was as recent as September 2025 as of making this video, which is a full decade after the phone was released. That longevity alone makes this phone deserving of making it to the next round in my eyes. We're on one heck of a streak here, and the good times aren't about to end quite yet.
So some people asked us, some people even pleaded with us, to please keep the 4-inch products in our lineup. Well, today we're going to do just that, and we're going to make it a whole lot better. And as you may have heard, we're calling it the iPhone SE.
The first iPhone to release mid-cycle in March 2016, the iPhone SE was ostensibly an iPhone 6s in the shell of an iPhone 5s, with the same rear camera, A9 chipset, and somehow even better battery life than that phone, all for a significantly reduced price. This phone also is going to make it onto the next round, and it stands to this day as the best budget phone Apple has ever made by far.
Courage. The courage to move on, do something new that betters all of us.
Fall 2016 would bring the iPhone 7 and 7 Plus, the first iPhones to remove the headphone jack. F tier. Okay, yes, another fake out, probably the last one, I'm sorry. And I guess we do need to be completely fair here. While this isn't the best iPhone ever, obviously, there's more to why that is than just the lack of headphone jack, as ridiculous as that move was. Apple had their excuses, but the reality was they just wanted to sell AirPods, and as great as AirPods are, it doesn't excuse this obvious display of corporate greed, especially a move that had such ramifications for the rest of the industry. Every other smartphone would eventually get rid of the headphone jack too, because, you know, every company also wants to make money. It's shocking, I know. The rest of the iPhone 7 and 7 Plus also just so happen to be some of the mildest iPhone upgrades we've seen thus far. The 7 Plus exclusively did bring a telephoto camera lens for the first time, which allowed for 2x optical zoom and portrait mode photos, but that was the best new addition of this phone by far, and it wasn't even on the smaller model, though IP67 water and dust resistance was really nice to get here. The matte black and jet black colors were also gorgeous, although I'm not really a fan of the other options. The product red iPhone 7 would come a bit later and was admittedly pretty cool, except the front had white bezels for some reason and a silver ring around the home button, which felt odd. The home button was capacitive now rather than physical, and the A10 chipset seemed to be a decent enough upgrade, except as if this phone didn't already have enough against it, the iPhone 7 only got to iOS 15, the same update the 6s got to despite being a full year newer than that phone. So yes, the iPhone 7 and 7 Plus are not the best iPhones of all time. The addition of the telephoto camera lens was incredibly important for the future of smartphones though, so we will bump it up to D tier. It's not iPhone 5C level bad, and if you actually used these phones back in the day, I'd wager you had a pretty solid experience. Now we move on to 2017, starting with the iPhone 8 and 8 Plus. These were small upgrades from the iPhone 7 and 7 Plus, bringing the A11 chipset, a glass backing to allow for wireless charging, fast charging capabilities if you had the right adapter, and honestly not a whole lot else, but that was okay because what was coming next was actually a really big upgrade. The iPhone 8 and 8 Plus were mid-range iPhones, and they were pretty good. I would put them solidly in C tier, a really good choice for people not ready to move on from the home button and Touch ID, but not phones that rocked the boat in any way, unlike the phone that came next.
We do have one more thing. iPhone 10, the most advanced iPhone we've ever made. It really is the future of the smartphone.
Released November 2017, the iPhone X was the most radical iPhone shakeup since the iPhone 4, and was arguably even more dramatic, dropping the home button altogether and shifting to gesture navigation, bringing an edge-to-edge high-resolution OLED display with only a notch intruding for the sake of Face ID. And there is this incredibly premium redesign with a stainless steel frame and glossy glass backing. That vertical camera bump is something special and feels quite unique compared to what we have today. The iPhone X is, in my opinion, the last time Apple really leapfrogged the competition in the smartphone space, and while this lead wouldn't last long, it did show that even post-Steve Jobs, Apple still could have that drive for innovation that made them so special to begin with. The iPhone X was certainly not a perfect phone, and we will see later on why. I mean, it did break into the $1,000 threshold, which a lot of people were very unhappy about. But this phone absolutely can be argued as the best iPhone of all time, and it easily moves on to round 2. Released late 2018, the iPhone XR was the iPhone 5C done right, bringing a less premium, lower cost builds compared to Apple's more expensive flagship, but unlike the 5C, it also included most of the biggest improvements of the year. The 6.1-inch LCD display was relatively low resolution, but that didn't matter. It brought Face ID and gesture navigation to the masses, and with the A12 chipset and the same main camera of Apple's foremost flagship, along with a bunch of fun colors, it felt inevitable that the XR would end up being a wild commercial success. And it was. While I really love the iPhone XR and it was a great iPhone, I don't think there's much argument to be made that this is the best iPhone ever. It did set the standard for the non-Pro iPhones for the future, and at $750 it had a very reasonable price tag, all things considered, but you can have a really great iPhone without it being the best. I did a whole video talking about the XR recently, and there's a lot to love here, but there was also some controversy surrounding the resolution, which was lower than that of the iPhone 8 Plus and visibly less crisp than most phones around this price tag, though ultimately it was still plenty decent and more than good enough for the users who might have actually bought this phone. The XR would get from iOS 12 all the way to iOS 18. That's 7 major updates, matching the standard set by the iPhone 6s. And it performs well even today on its final update, assuming you have a healthy battery. Not the best iPhone ever, and it doesn't move on to round 2, but I'm placing it in B tier for being such a solid entry into the mid-range smartphone market. Also released in 2018 as Apple's headlining flagship and the direct successor to the now discontinued iPhone X, which was sold for under a year, the iPhone XS and XS Max did a couple very important things. It brought a bigger size option, as well as standard improvements in specs, and let's see, there was a gold color. And okay, that last one wasn't so important, but it was clear with this phone, Apple had basically thrown all of their new tech into the iPhone X and needed a bit of a break year to kind of let things settle and actually come up with some new stuff. As a result, the iPhone XS is one of the smallest iPhone upgrades we've ever seen, and it had really rough battery life. This was a problem with the iPhone X as it was, but even the XS Max, which you think would have improved this greatly, really didn't. The XS did, however, get 7 major updates and was overall a very solid performer, but it makes for one of the most forgettable iPhones of all time, and even the name felt like a bit of a joke. XS, XS, XS? Yeah, maybe not something you should call your $1,000 plus iPhone that people already considered overpriced and brought very little over its predecessor. I'm going with D tier for this phone, even if it was the last iPhone with 3D Touch, which at least is something that helps it stand out in hindsight. Fall 2019 would finally see the standard being set for Apple's iPhone naming scheme moving forward after a very confusing last couple of years, starting with the $700 iPhone 11. Yes, $700, $50 less than the XR. And again, we got many of the upgrades seen on its Pro counterpart, with night photography and even the new ultra-wide camera sensor hitting the rear, along with the A13 chip and improved battery life. We still had the somewhat low-res LCD screen, but Apple honestly put a lot more into this phone than they probably even needed to. I think it would have sold well with or without that second camera lens, but Apple included it anyways, and that deserves respect. Plus, they lowered the price. $750 would have kept this phone plenty competitive, but again, Apple lowered the price anyways. Did they have to? No, but they did. Apple was really nailing these non-Pro iPhones, and while the 11 clearly is not the best iPhone of all time, it still is one of the best mid-range models they've probably ever released. And if you bought it all the way back in 2019, you could still be using it today on iOS 26 no problem, assuming your battery can last more than like 5 minutes. All in all, extremely solid iPhone entry, and I think B tier, alongside the iPhone XR, is completely justified.
But we didn't stop there. For our customers that want the most sophisticated technology that really pushes the limits, we've created something truly special.
Released alongside the iPhone 11 fall 2019, the iPhone 11 Pro and 11 Pro Max made some huge leaps in photography with Apple's first triple lens setup, and the quality, particularly in low-light photography, saw a huge jump, making for all in all possibly the most well-rounded camera setup of the year. We got this new premium frosted glass backing while retaining the rounded stainless steel frame. Also, the Apple logo was centered now, as well as on the iPhone 11, if that matters. It was definitely an interesting move at the time, I guess. I remember thinking it was a bit weird, but it really didn't take that long to get used to it. But the battery life finally saw the biggest leap we'd probably ever seen in a singular iPhone generation. As someone who went from the smaller iPhone XS to the 11 Pro Max, I can assure you that this was a very much needed and very appreciated upgrade. The A13 chip also helped this phone get updates all the way to iOS 26, which is current as of making this video, and while iOS 27 is very unlikely, the longevity of this phone has been still extremely impressive. The iPhone 11 Pro really doesn't feel 6 years old, and it's so comfortable in the hand. A lot of people miss that curved design, and I kinda get it. Plus, as if this phone couldn't get any better, this would be the only year Apple actually included a fast charging brick in the box, something I'm still using to this day. Oh, and also that midnight green color was beautiful, and really unique within the smartphone landscape for the time. Absolutely a great iPhone, and the main knocks against it is that ultimately it was at its core maybe still a refined iPhone X. And also probably what the iPhone XS should have been like the year before. All in all though, I do think the argument can be made that this is the best iPhone ever if you come from the perspective of this phone setting up Pro iPhones for the future, and also maybe being the best Pro iPhone Apple's made. I do think you can argue that, so I guess we'll take a look later as the 11 Pro does move on to the next round. Dropped via a press release early 2020, the second generation iPhone SE took the body of the iPhone 8 and added the A13 chipset from the iPhone 11. Changing little else and costing a fairly reasonable $400, fairly reasonable, this phone compared to the first SE is very disappointing, as again practically nothing changed from the 2.5-year-old iPhone 8, including the camera sensor, but the upgraded specs were welcome, and this was the perfect phone for those not yet ready to move on from the home button design. All in all, decent budget iPhone for the time. I think C or D tier. I'm gonna go C tier for now, but it's definitely not the best iPhone ever by a long shot. Actually, no, I changed my mind after the fact. This should be D tier. Like, seriously, barely anything changed from the iPhone 8. To this point, it was the laziest iPhone Apple had probably ever made. I mean, even something like the 5C took a lot of effort. Look at the design of that phone. The SE, not so much, although they did center the Apple logo, so I guess there's that. So yeah, D tier for this phone, and man alive, this is taking forever. I don't know why I do this to myself, these sorts of videos. They take too long. I'd really appreciate it if you hit that like button, but of course you've already done that, right? Right? Well, if you haven't, then now's your chance. But okay, back to the video now. But thank you.
So now I'd like to show you the very first iPhone with 5G.
Announced October 2020, the iPhone 12 and 12 mini were kind of surprisingly great. Not only did we see the OLED screen finally hit the non-Pro models, but we also got this revamped flat-sided design, harkening back to the iPhone 5, with reduced bezels and 5G networking too. Plus, all the typical upgrades you would expect. And the 5.4-inch iPhone 12 mini was extremely welcome for the niche group of users that had been largely forgotten since the 2016 iPhone SE, and having a genuinely flagship-level phone at this size was incredible. And we'll be discussing further just why and how I think this phone is so great in the next round, as I do think there's an argument to be made here for this being one of the best iPhones ever made. Also coming late 2020 would be the iPhone 12 Pro and 12 Pro Max, which refined the design of the iPhone 11 Pro, but brought little else to actually make the experience distinct from the iPhone 12 and 12 mini, to the point that a case for the iPhone 12 fits on the 12 Pro. You can interchange them. Both phones had MagSafe, I forgot to mention that with the 12, but that was a great feature. Yeah, third telephoto camera lens here, plus LiDAR capabilities, and the screens got a little larger, but outside of that, there was scarce reason to pay $200 extra for this phone over the regular 12. Battery life on the 12 Pro was disappointing compared to the 11 Pro, and as beautiful as this phone was, the lack of a 120Hz refresh rate in 2020, when it was fairly common on Android flagships by this point, made it feel just behind the times. And 5G in 2020, yeah, it was a necessary upgrade, but it really hurt battery life, and wasn't something that really made much of an impact for most users. Overall, while the design was nice, this was a small iPhone upgrade, and the most disappointing since the XS, which was, I guess, only a couple iPhones ago, but even so, I'm putting the 12 Pro in D tier. Released fall 2021, the iPhone 13 and 13 mini would refine the iPhone 12's design with a reduced notch and a very necessary reorientation of the camera lenses. They're diagonally placed now, guys. That's like, it's different, so it's better. Bringing most of the specs of its Pro counterpart, the 13 is one of the greatest mid-range iPhones Apple has ever made, and it's still holding up well even today. The battery life was improved a decent little bit over the 12, which was particularly important for the 13 mini. I'd be lying if I said the 13 mini today has a good battery. It doesn't, but it is better than the 12 mini, and considering the small physical size of the phone, I'm willing to give it a lot of slack. The 13 mini, even existing in the first place, was, as with the 12 mini, an almost surprisingly pro-consumer move from Apple. It allows for a lower price tag and appeals to that niche group of users long forgotten by the rest of the smartphone industry, those who actually prefer small phones. They do exist, believe it or not. There's probably a few in the comments right now. Now, while both the 13 and 13 mini were, in my opinion, pretty fantastic phones, I'm gonna put them into B tier and say they don't move on to the next round. The iPhone 12 and 12 mini may have worse specs and battery life, but considering how big a jump they were from the iPhone 11, the 13 just doesn't quite match up to that precedent. Though going from 64 to 128 gigs did add some legitimate value. And so as great as these phones were, and really still are, I do think it'd be a stretch to consider them the best iPhones ever. B tier just feels right.
And for the first time, we're bringing ProMotion to iPhone.
Again, from fall 2021, we have the iPhone 13 Pro and 13 Pro Max, a substantial step up from the 12 Pro with not only the new reduced notch like with the 13, but also ProMotion, granting the display 120 Hz that gives a buttery smooth iOS experience unparalleled by previous iPhones. It's one of those features you need to sort of use for yourself to understand, and it would be exclusive to Pro iPhones for the next 4 years, making the 13 Pro feel even more ahead of things in hindsight. The rest of the phone was also great, having that 12 Pro design, which was absolutely beautiful. The 13 Pro is probably one of the best Pro iPhones Apple has ever made, but it does look a whole lot like that 12 Pro. And ProMotion is arguably, in my opinion, a feature that should have come a year earlier. So how much credit do we give the 13 Pro for finally bringing something that already should have been there? That's actually a good question for a lot of different iPhones. How much credit do we give the iPhone 8 or the iPhone 10 for bringing wireless charging when a lot of Android competitors had it years prior? But in any case, as much as I loved my old 13 Pro, and I really did, I think it slots perfectly into B tier. Just a really solid Pro iPhone, but it doesn't make it onto the next round. Coming early 2022, the third generation iPhone SE was one of the worst iPhone upgrades we've ever seen. All it changed from the second gen SE was the A15 Bionic chipset and the addition of 5G networking. That was ostensibly it, and again, that camera sensor was unchanged, like from the iPhone 8. Oh, also the price went up to $430, and it would stay at that price for nearly 3 years until the iPhone 16e finally came in and put this phone out of its misery. This is easily an F-tier iPhone. Again, Apple was selling this phone as recently as early 2025 for $429 US, and it doesn't even have night mode photography, a feature that came on the iPhone 11 in 2019. It's abhorrent, and while the SE itself holds up okay because the processor is good, it's still one of the worst excuses for an iPhone upgrade we've ever seen. From late 2022, we have the iPhone 14 and 14 Plus, a stark pivot from the fantastic mid-range models in the iPhone 12 and 13. Gone was the Mini, replaced outright by the exact opposite, the 14 Plus, featuring a 6.7-inch display, the same size as the Pro Max models, whereas the regular 14 was still 6.1 inches and looks identical to the iPhone 13 from the front. And these phones basically look the same from the back too. There is a slight difference if you look closely beyond just the colors, with the camera sensors being a little bigger on the iPhone 14. That's one of the only actual upgrades of this phone, and it's a relatively minor one. Both lenses are still 12 megapixels, but you do get slightly better low-light photography. We also have the A15 Bionic chipset. Wait, that sounds familiar, but don't worry, this isn't the same chip as in the iPhone 13, guys. It's the one from the 13 Pro. It has, you know, a single extra GPU core. Yeah, okay, the iPhone 8, 10R, 11, 12, 13, what did they all have in common? They all had the same chipset as the better flagship. Now, there is 6 gigs of RAM in the 14 versus only 4 in the 13, which is more of a substantial improvement, but beyond that, there's really nothing else worth mentioning here. The iPhone 14 and 14 Plus are pathetically small upgrades, and were absolutely egregious after a solid string of really great non-Pro iPhones. No longer were we getting the latest chipset, or a lot of the benefits of the newer models. No ProMotion was still acceptable for me, given it did just come on the 13 Pro, but everything else was just insulting. Now, to be clear, the iPhone 14 and 14 Plus are still solid smartphones even today, and and I guarantee at least a couple of you out there who've watched this far into the video are doing so on this exact phone. It is a good phone, but that's because the 13 was a great phone and this device was practically unchanged. They could have kept selling the iPhone 13 for another year and it would have more or less accomplished the same thing. Now, of course, the minis never really sold all that well, but to get rid of it in favor of a Plus iPhone that also would not sell that well, by the way, when Pro Max phones were available, they basically just removed a size option from their lineup and also got rid of an option at a lower price tag, right? Because those minis cost $700, whereas the 6.1-inch iPhones cost $800, which is now the standard starting price. All of this always just left a really bad taste in my mouth, and yeah, I'm sticking the iPhone 14 in F tier for being one of the worst iPhone upgrades of all time. 2 F tiers in a row is not a good look, but let's keep rolling here. Up next, we have the iPhone 14 Pro and 14 Pro Max, phones that once again retained that 12 Pro design, but we did see the bezels continue to shrink, as well as now this dynamic island, rather than the reduced notch. This is a feature I've always maintained is brutally underrated, and one of the best things we've seen out of modern Apple. Add in some solid specs, the new 48 megapixel main camera lens, and naturally ProMotion, and you have a pretty solid entry into the Pro iPhone line. This phone being one of the last to have the Lightning port does bring it down for me a bit, and I also don't think there was anything particularly that special about it. So C tier, I want to say feels like a good fit, being a perfectly reasonable iPhone upgrade that just didn't rock the boat. Oh, also the always on display was new this year, which would be exclusive to Pro iPhones for the next few years, as crazy as that seems, but anyways, decent iPhone, C tier feels fair.
USB-C has become a universally accepted standard.
Coming late 2023, the iPhone 15 and 15 Plus did bring some more substantial improvements versus the iPhone 14, with the A16 chip from the 14 Pro, plus a 48 megapixel camera and a dynamic island. Oh, and USB-C as well, as Apple was basically forced to do this by the EU. What hurt this phone was the lack of ProMotion. 60Hz for an $800 and $900 phone in 2023 was pretty painful, and we still had a lot of the downsides that came with the 14 and 14 Plus to begin with. Like, no mini option, hello. But all in all, this was still a really solid device and one that makes for a good buy even today for the right price. It's going to slot into C tier, being fairly unexciting. As much as I do like that design, it was refined from the 14, that's worth mentioning, with sort of a more premium matte finish, the rounded edges. It's a good phone, just not one that's particularly special. To be clear, I find C tier are good iPhones, just not great ones, and I think the 15 fits that bill perfectly.
And we are thrilled to introduce our astonishing new titanium design. This is the most premium material we've ever used in an iPhone enclosure.
Again, from late 2023, we see the titanium iPhone 15 Pro and 15 Pro Max. We sort of got a redesign, though it still looks very similar to the 2020 12 Pro when you boil things down. Yeah, it's titanium now, so there's that. The telephoto camera lens on the 15 Pro Max now has a 5x zoom, which I can say from personal experience was really cool, and having USB-C with USB 3 speeds made this phone feel really pro. Plus, battery life was also really solid. With the A17 Pro chipset, this is the oldest iPhone that can run Apple Intelligence, which helps its longevity, and you know what, that natural titanium really makes for a beautiful device. I might be biased because I used this phone for the past couple of years, but I do maintain it was a very strong entry into the Pro iPhone lineup, and a decent improvement from the 14 Pro. Oh, also, the action button was a thing, everyone's favorite feature. All in all, I'm gonna go with B tier, under the assumption that this phone continues to age quite well. Not the best iPhone ever, but a really solid Pro model that felt different enough from the 14 Pro, even if that whole titanium switch up was really not much more than change for the sake of change.
The next generation of iPhone has been designed for Apple Intelligence from the ground up. It marks the beginning of an exciting new era, and here it is.
Coming fall 2024, the iPhone 16 and 16 Plus changed little from the iPhone 15 and 15 Plus, bringing the A18 chipset and Apple Intelligence. Whoa, hold on here, A18? Yeah, that's right, we went from the A16 to A18 in 1 year. I guess that is pretty decent. We also got the action button, the new camera control button, and the reoriented camera lenses yet again for the sake of spatial video capture this time, a feature I'm pretty sure no one has ever used. Period. Yet again, this phone had only 60 Hz, and the lack of change from the 15 made it feel very lazy. This is an easy D tier for me. The A18 chip is great, but everything else about the phone was not great. And the only real positive is that Apple was forced to give the more modern chipset to this device because of Apple Intelligence. They basically had to re-catch up with the Pro iPhones because, they had purposely fallen behind. It's so silly. But in any case, yeah, D tier. Again, from 2024, we've got the iPhone 16 Pro and 16 Pro Max, the smallest upgrade to any Pro iPhone possibly ever. You can make an argument for the 12 Pro being similarly minor, or maybe the 10s if you count that phone as a Pro iPhone, but in any case, the 16 Pro brought the A18 Pro chipset. Yeah, I mean, it couldn't actually be the same chipset as the iPhone 16. What, you think you're getting value with those mid-range models? No. There's now a 48 megapixel ultra-wide lens, that's cool. There's the 5x zoom lens on both size options now, and the displays actually did get a little bit bigger to 6.3 inches and 6.9. The camera control button exists, and it's a nice enough feature, but all in all, this was yet another disappointing iPhone, and felt far too similar to the 15 Pro, to the extent I myself skipped this generation, despite upgrading every single year going back to the 2017 iPhone 10. Yes, this is the only year I skipped buying a new iPhone because I was that disappointed. Pretty easy D tier for me. It's not F tier because the phone itself is still fantastic. All in all, just a very boring iPhone coming off of its predecessor, D tier. A bit of a surprise coming February 2025, the iPhone 16e finally replaced the SE in Apple's lineup as their new budget iPhone, except it costs $600. Yes, the 3rd gen SE at $429 in 2025 was an absolute joke, but at least it could still be considered a proper budget phone. But hold on, maybe the increase in price was worth it. Well, sort of yes, because the SE3 was genuinely awful, but also very much no. This is basically just the cheapest version of an iPhone 16. With an iPhone 14 display and notch, and this really bare bones black or white design. The upside is the internals. You've got the A18 chip allowing for Apple Intelligence, and there is the action button, but we don't get any camera control button, dynamic island, or even MagSafe, which is a really weird decision on Apple's part. The single 48 megapixel camera on the back is fine, or at least that's what I expected when the phone was announced, but the sensor itself is actually smaller than that of even the iPhone 15, which means lower quality photos than the specs might imply. While I did feel like this device was far better value than the 16 and 16 Plus when it came out, I'd say that's more of an indictment on Apple's iPhone lineup as a whole, rather than some huge positive for this phone. Though there are upsides here. When it comes to that C1 modem, the processing power, and especially battery life, it can be quite impressive. But Apple Intelligence still sucks, no matter how hard Apple markets it, and the fact that this phone is $600 as their so-called budget model just feels so greedy on Apple's part. We're at $500. I think I would see the 16e in a much more positive light. And I'm not going to say this is an outright bad phone, because it isn't. It's going to get many years of updates, it's fast enough, it's just very disappointing and ultimately lazy. D tier would probably be pretty fair, but I'm going to be a bit bold here and say if the iPhone 14 and 14 Plus are deserving of F tier, the 16e is as well. There was just so much wasted potential for a device like this, but here we are. Thankfully, our next iPhone here is a lot better.
Today, we're raising the bar once again with an all-new iPhone lineup that's unlike anything we've ever created.
And now we come to the most recent iPhones as of making this video, starting with the iPhone 17 from fall 2025. Gone was the Plus model, with the iPhone 17 getting bumped up to 6.3 inches and finally bringing that buttery smooth ProMotion display that is every bit as good as the one on its Pro counterpart. The starting storage was doubled from 128 gigs to 256 at that entry-level price of $800. So yeah, double the storage, double the refresh rate, plus we got the 48 megapixel ultra-wide camera off the 16 Pro, and there's that huge upgrade to the selfie camera, all at the same price that the 16 had just cost. It is wild how much better value this iPhone is relative to what we've seen in recent years, and the only problem with judging this phone is we don't know how well or poorly it'll age, but I'm gonna wager it ages pretty well. The A19 chip and 8 gigs of RAM should ensure solid performance for years to come, even if the iPhone Air and of course 17 Pro have 12 gigs of RAM and upgraded A19 Pro chipsets. But I think this phone will do just as well as any other recent iPhone, and of course, it's going to provide a really great experience. I'm so happy we finally have the ProMotion display on here. It is long overdue. Did I mention that the video playback also saw an 8-hour increase in battery life over the 16 as well? This is not the best iPhone ever, probably, but it is one of the best mid-range iPhones Apple's released in a good few years. While I'm not going to have it move on to the next round simply because, in the very least, I think it's way way too early to realistically argue that this phone is the best iPhone ever, and the design's the same as the 16, and you know, I'm gonna make an exception here regardless and put it in A tier because it's just so much better than the 16. This is one of those things, if I revisit this in another, 7 years, maybe that won't age so well, but for now, we're putting it in A tier, and this is the only phone in A tier that isn't making it to round 2. So yeah, props to you, Apple. You kind of nailed it with the 17 this year. Good job. Then there's the iPhone Air from late 2025, which stands out as possibly the most unique iPhone we've looked at thus far. Not only is the name unnumbered, which could result in some very confusing future models, I swear if we see an iPhone Air 2 next year, alongside like the iPhone 18 and 18 Pro, I'm gonna be very peeved. It feels like Apple just fixed their naming scheme, please don't do this. But all in all, this is a really cool device, and more of a conceptually neat phone than one you would want to actually buy. It's ridiculously thin, but the trade-off comes in a worse battery and only a single camera lens on the back, all for $1,000, $200 more than the iPhone 17, which is for the most part a substantially better phone. That thin, polished titanium design combined with the 6.5-inch ProMotion display, man, it makes for a beautiful package, and it's hard not to respect Apple for throwing this phone out into the world. Yeah, I'm skeptical of how it's going to age, especially in battery performance, but this does have to be one of Apple's most ambitious designs in a long time. However, there is a big question that arises with this phone, and it can be summed up in one word. Why? Why does this phone exist? Who is it for? Why would anyone buy it? Sure, it's a fun experiment and is no doubt a great device, but impressive design purely for the sake of being impressive doesn't necessarily lead to a good product. Not when large compromises are needed to accommodate a gimmick like this. Like, is the iPhone 17 or 17 Pro thicker and chunkier than the Air? Sure, but not to the point that they're somehow uncomfortable to hold or use. Why would you give up the extra camera lens and battery life of the iPhone 17 to get a thinner phone for $200 extra? It just doesn't make sense. The iPhone Air need not exist, but it is still absolutely a marvel of engineering. I'm gonna go with C tier for now, and while maybe I'll view it differently down the road, I'm pretty confident this isn't anywhere near the best iPhone ever made. It is pretty cool though. And finally, we come to the latest and greatest iPhones in the 17 Pro and 17 Pro Max. Moving to a unibody aluminum build with this sort of separate ceramic shield piece on the back for MagSafe and wireless charging, this phone is quite the departure from previous Pro models. Apple does seem to be shifting their priorities for their iPhone line moving forward, with less of an emphasis in premium design on the 17 Pro in favor of focusing on maximizing performance. The aluminum is better for thermal management, plus there's a full-on vapor chamber inside, and while the durability is rather questionable, as scratches happen way too easily, the phone overall seems like a step in the right direction, at least in my opinion. Also, the display is like really scratch resistant. That goes for the iPhone Air and 17 as well, so that's pretty cool. The 4x zoom 48 megapixel telephoto lens can crop into 12 megapixels for this 8x zoom, which is awesome, and having this ultimate 48 megapixel trifecta of cameras on the back brings so much versatility to the experience. Battery life is also outstanding, and I love that cosmic orange so much. All in all, I'm gonna throw this phone into B tier for the time being, but in the future, it's possible A tier could be argued. The non-Pro 17 does seem like objectively better value though, costing $300 less, and again, I'm not too impressed with the durability side of things. I should not have scratches on my phone just from putting the case on and taking it off again, but Apple's strides in scratch resistance for the display this year is realistically far more important than some scuffing on the corners of my phone or on the camera plateau. Oh yeah, and it's called the camera plateau now. I think this is cool. They're cramming hardware up there. I think it makes sense, and it results in maybe a little bit more of a subtle camera wobble compared to past years, so I'm pretty happy with it. All in all, again, B tier seems fair. And so with that, we have now finished round 1. Oh my goodness, finally. Having discussed 34 iPhone models, it is time to move on to round 2 and determine the best of the best. Okay, so here we have our current rankings, including a whole bunch of phones that have made it to round 2. First off, real quick here, I'm going to put the iPhone 13 Pro actually in A tier. I've thought about this a lot, and I don't think I gave it enough credit, particularly with its increase in battery life. It was a really good phone, and I would say deserving of a tier above the 15 Pro and the 17 Pro for sure. It isn't the best iPhone ever though, so it won't move on to this next round. As I was going through this, I began to realize just how generous I was to those earlier iPhone models. I mean, from 2012 to 2017, 2013 alone. We have 6 iPhones making it to round 2, but as I continued through this, I just couldn't help but feel it was all pretty justified. With the exception of one of these phones that we'll see, all of them slot into A tier at minimum for me, and I feel like I have pretty good reason for it behind each and every model. As for everything else, when I look at it like this, I don't know, I've been going back and forth with some of them. Is the 12 Pro really D tier worthy? I mean, that design was gorgeous and it more or less stuck around a really long time, but then I remember how the battery life was literally worse than the 11 Pro, how there was no ProMotion yet, even though there probably should have been, and how the iPhone 12 was so similar it could literally fit in the exact same case. I just don't see it being any better than D tier. And maybe I'm giving the 15 Pro too much praise for bringing USB-C. I mean, Apple was forced to do that, and again, it's another thing they probably should have had years sooner. Definitely should have had years sooner. But I really like that phone, it's held up well, and as crappy as Apple Intelligence is, the fact that it is the oldest iPhone that can run it, it adds some serious value there, and it's just a solid phone. The titanium design also super nice, I'm not gonna lie. But we could debate this kind of stuff all day. All in all, we're gonna run with what we have here and shift focus onto narrowing down our top contenders to just a few models that have the most legitimate claim to being the best iPhone ever. Right off the bat, I do think there's a few obvious picks we can exclude from the third round, but I want to be as fair as possible here, so let's work backwards chronologically this time and see where we end up. The iPhone 12 was a massive leap from the already really solid iPhone 11 with that high-resolution vibrant OLED panel and sleek modern redesign for this new era of iPhone in the 2020s. The notch was on the big side still, sure, and battery life was only just okay and downright kind of bad on the 12 mini, but that right there, the 12 mini even existing in the first place, is what really solidifies this iPhone as being one of the best of all time for me. Is it the best? No, it's not, but this is a rare example of Apple making an iPhone not really for the masses, but for a niche dedicated group of users, one that still loved their small form factor smartphones. The 12 mini recaptured the spirit of the 2016 iPhone SE, but it was still a full-fledged flagship, and the 12 being as similar to the 12 Pro as it was made it all the better in hindsight. The gap between the Pro and non-Pro iPhones have probably never been smaller than with this generation. And imagine today how popular a $700 iPhone 17 mini would be, maybe at 5.8 inches rather than 5.4. It feels so far-fetched that Apple would ever do that, but the thing is, they've done it before. And you could tell Apple was having fun with it from the presentation alone, not even mentioning the 12 mini until a ways into the unveiling.
This is iPhone 12 mini.
Apple had to know the iPhone 12 mini wouldn't be nearly as profitable as the 6.1-inch iPhone 12, but they released it anyways. And I've got so much respect for that. It's almost like this was a completely different company than the Apple of today, at least sort of, and we'll see why I say that in a sec. We can talk about everything else great about this phone, like MagSafe, or how about that beautiful blue color, man. The glossy glass, maybe it's not as premium feeling in the hand, but man does it ever look good. And as said, there is so much more that's great about the iPhone 12. But then there is this one major knock against it that signified that Apple did in fact still care far more about profit than their customers. This is the year where Apple got rid of the included charging brick under the guise of becoming more environmentally friendly. Carbon neutral by 2030, they tell us over and over, while removing the chargers a decade beforehand. Because of course, all those cheap 5-watt adapters we've been including for years, well, they all end up in landfills anyways, right? No one uses those things. It's so much better for the planet if we just don't include them anymore. And have no fear, you can pay extra to buy one if you need to. So a couple crucial things here. Number one, don't fall for Apple's posturing. This has nothing to do with the environment and everything to do with their bottom line. Not only could they save money in not including those chargers and make money in increased sales for new chargers, but they also were able to significantly reduce the packaging size. Also, of course, no longer including the Lightning earpods at this point just to add insult to injury. Think of the millions upon millions of dollars saved simply in packaging and shipping costs. It was actually sort of brilliant if you just look at it from a purely capitalist perspective. I mean, they could win some easy points from the media by saying, you know, they're going to be carbon neutral and save a crap ton of money in the process. Well, hey, sign me up. So that's bad enough, but what makes it all worse, and this is the number 2 big issue, this was the year Apple switched from including Lightning to USB-A cables over to Lightning to USB-C cables instead. On its face, this was very much a good thing, and they'd actually already done this with specifically the 11 Pro the year before, but that phone came with a compatible power adapter, USB-C, 18 watts. Most of the users upgrading to the iPhone 12 at this point likely didn't even have a USB-C wall adapter yet, because Apple had never bothered including them outside of their most expensive iPhone in 2019, meaning all those 5-watt adapters people did have were now truly landfill fodder if you wanted to use the cable that was actually included with your phone. Again, USB-C was the right move, but of course, it was right at this pivotal time when people would actually need to buy these new chargers that Apple stopped including them. And much like the headphone jack, it wouldn't take long for other smartphone manufacturers like Samsung to also begin including less and less accessories. And a half decade later, I was unboxing my 17 Pro and it came with one single slip of paper telling me that the phone is eSIM only now. And that's it. There's not even Apple stickers. It's so deflating and feels so cheap when Apple used to put so much effort into making every part of the experience something truly special. Is this all the end of the world? No, it's not. And I don't blame the iPhone 12 in particular for this change, to be honest, because it was gonna happen regardless. Apple loves money. All in all, the iPhone 12 and 12 mini are still some of the best iPhones we've seen in recent history, and I do think they absolutely deserve to slot into A tier, but there were still signs of Apple's corporate greed becoming more and more prevalent as the 2020s began. Oh, and also last thing, man alive, Apple was far too proud of 5G. They would not shut up about it in their presentation, but all in all, good job with the iPhone 12, Apple. Now please bring back the mini iPhone, please. Think of the battery life for those poor users still stuck using the 12 and 13 mini. They deserve better.
And of course, the stunning new iPhone 11 Pro with its jam-packed with advanced technologies designed to enable people to do even more than before.
The first official Pro iPhone. It is almost shocking how similar this phone remains to the newest Pro iPhones 6 years later. While the camera plateau has finally changed the overall look from the rear, that trifecta of lenses still stands strong, a now iconic piece of modern iPhone design, and the 11 Pro and 11 Pro Max were the first phones to bring it. After multiple years of Apple's photography beginning to lag behind competition like the Google Pixel, this would thrust them once again to the forefront of smartphone photography, offering what I would argue was the ultimate setup for 2019. Not only was Apple already ahead of the game for video capture, but having three 12-megapixel lenses ranging from 0.5x to 2x zoom in combination with the low light improvements had the 11 Pro situated as an extremely robust and versatile phone, able to capture incredible photos and video in nearly any situation. The selfie camera also received a significant upgrade, going to 12 megapixels compared to only 7 on the XS, and the cameras as a whole were the biggest upgrade on the 11 Pro. And it's no coincidence that what we get from major flagship smartphones today just so happened to line up with what the 11 Pro brought to the table. Ultra-wide, wide, and telephoto lens. It is a pattern nearly any big smartphone still follows, be it the Galaxy Fold 7, Pixel 10 Pro, or even the iPhone 17 Pro. And hey, you can probably thank the 11 Pro, in part at least, for the wider variety of colors we're used to today as well. Midnight green was a bit of a departure from past color options, and seemed a bit random, but I don't know, I loved it as soon as I saw it. There is no question that the next year's iPhone 12 and 12 Pro were sleeker phones, and the 12 Pro's display getting a bit bigger was a welcome change, at least for me, but there still is something to be said about that 11 Pro form factor. We lose out on the modern flat sides and slim bezels, but this more curved and, dare I say, more comfortable build of the 11 Pro is something that I find myself sometimes missing more and more as the years have gone by. I think Apple, since the 15 and 15 Pro, have found a pretty good balance here, as they would soften the edges of their phones. The 12 era of design was a lot sharper, which looked nice but felt worse in the hand to me, not that it mattered too much since I always use a case anyways. But that 11 Pro design was stellar, and the move to that frosted glass matte finish was also brilliant. Apple certainly was not the first to do this, obviously, but it did become a significantly more popular trend after they made the move, and it made sense with the phone not being nearly the fingerprint magnets that the iPhone 10 and 10s were. It also allowed for better differentiation between the Pro and non-Pro models. On the Pro, you would have the polished stainless steel frame, frosted glass backing, and glossy camera bump, whereas on the non-Pro you had the direct inverse, with a matte aluminum frame, glossy backing, and then the matte finish on the camera bump. The non-Pro designs weren't lesser, really, but the Pros still felt more Pro in the hand, if that makes sense. And I remember thinking this camera bump was so big when the 11 Pro first came out, but then compared to future generations, it seems rather minuscule. I upgraded personally from the iPhone XS to the 11 Pro Max, as I wanted to try out the bigger screen and also get the better battery life. This was all well at launch in 2019, and I would absolutely love that phone, with it still standing out in my memory as one of the bigger upgrades I've experienced, having generally bought a new iPhone every year since 2017 with the exception of 2024. While the cameras were a big part of what made that phone so great, with the ultrawide especially being enticing, and of course I did appreciate the new design in the green, it felt fresh, but the biggest thing that stood out to me at the time was the battery life, as it made the most actual impact on my day-to-day usage with the phone. As said earlier, this is one of the biggest battery upgrades we've ever seen in a singular generation, and it really was far, far better than the pretty mediocre XS and XS Max. For the first time in my life, I never had to worry about always double-checking my iPhone to see that it was at a decent charge before leaving the house. I had confidence that it would be just fine because it always was. The 11 Pro is strange in hindsight, because not only did it mark the beginning of this new era for Apple with their Pro line of phones, but it also signals the end of the old. This being the final iPhone of the decade feels appropriate when you consider the ever-increasing display sizes, the move to the sleek, modern, flat frame, and even the fact that Apple was willing to include an 18-watt fast charger in the box for the 11 Pro. Heck, this was even Apple's final live presentation for iPhone, and I kinda miss them. There's something about hearing the crowd reaction that adds a level of hype that these newer flashy presentations sorely lack. And all in all, I would say this was a really strong phone to cap out that brief iPhone X era, 2017 to 2019, before the dawn of 5G and ever-growing corporate greed with the shrinking down of phone boxes to save a buck. That 11 Pro Max box was unabashedly huge, and once again, I'm still using that same 18-watt USB-C power adapter all these years later. Turns out if you actually give people a useful charger, they'll get used. I know, it's crazy. Admittedly, those earpods never got used, I don't think, since I already had AirPods by this point anyways, and that was an exclusion I could better understand over the charging brick. But don't forget, by 2019, most people upgrading to a phone like this, good chance they were coming from a phone that still had a headphone jack and wouldn't have headphones already compatible with their new phone. And hey, who's gonna complain about a free pair of decent earbuds? This is not the best iPhone ever, and on its surface, it shared a lot in common with the iPhone XS and XS Max. In many ways, amounting to the phone those devices probably should have been. But the first Pro iPhone does probably still hold up as maybe Apple's most ambitious Pro entry to date, and while it doesn't make it to round 3, I'm slotting the 11 Pro definitively into A tier. It is very unlikely to get past iOS 26, and battery life is going to be pretty rough for anyone still using one of these phones today, but it has overall held up really darn well, and in my eyes is one of the most underrated iPhone models of the past decade.
This is iPhone 10. It is the biggest leap forward since the original iPhone.
What can even be said about the iPhone X? I mean, just look at it. It's pretty self-explanatory, isn't it? This phone had a large focus in my 2-hour retrospective last year, where we attempted to determine where iPhone peaked. Not necessarily what the best iPhone was, mind you, but when Apple was at their best in terms of innovation and pushing smartphones forward as a whole. And while I won't spoil that video, and there were plenty of other iPhones also competing for the ever-elusive peak status, that may or may not have had better claim to the title over the iPhone X. Hey, you gotta watch the video and find out, I guess. After this one anyways. But there's no doubt that this was the phone that set up not just every iPhone generation onwards, but every modern flagship that we see today. The iPhone X is without any doubt a legitimate contender for the best iPhone ever, and I think it has to move on to round 3, where we will finally take a properly close look at it. I know, I'm making you wait even longer. And to be clear, there are plenty of flaws to go along with the good, but that good here is just so dang amazing. And hey, if you're at all skeptical of the 10th anniversary iPhone, I've got just one word for you.
An emoji.
Clearly this is an S-tier iPhone, and I refuse to hear any differently. As much as the first iPhone SE is by and far Apple's best budget smartphone ever, and I did a proper retrospective a little bit ago that I will also have linked in the description, ultimately we have to be careful about how much credit we give them for this move, right? After all, they just reused the old design of the 5S, it's cheap for them, it's cheap for us, everyone wins. Is this really worthy of being considered one of the best iPhones ever? Well, let's look at the context here. This was early 2016, a time where 4-inch iPhones were still very much popular. It's easy to forget with the direction smartphones would ultimately take, but the debate was very real in phablets versus smaller form factor devices that could be easily used with one hand. The iPhone 6 and 6 Plus coming in 2014 were, if anything, a bit late to the party, but there was still a major contingency of particularly iPhone users who didn't want bigger sizes and felt left behind in this new era of smartphones. This led to the absolute perfect opportunity for Apple to capitalize on a market that they already owned. The question wasn't whether or not they should make another 4-inch iPhone, because it was a no-brainer, with their presentation of the SE even setting up just how popular these smaller phones phones were. The real question was the how Apple would go about doing this, and if we'd be seeing another situation like the 5C, where they had a laughably terrible value phone that they claimed was for the more budget-oriented market. Apple was in an interesting spot here because on one hand, a new 4-inch iPhone would have to be substantially better than the iPhone 5S, a phone they were still actively selling when the 6S launched. Late 2015, a 16GB iPhone 6S would run you $650 and the 5S, as a now 2-year-old device, sat on the budget end of the lineup at $450. While this was not an amazing deal by any means, it was expected and the standard of fare from Apple at the time, and no one would have batted an eye if they just continued selling it for the entire next year. But of course, for the first time in iPhone history, we would see a new model coming mid-cycle the March of 2016.
So we start with this beloved aluminum design, but we've made some beautiful refinements, including this gorgeous rose gold finish. But it's on the inside where the iPhone SE really shines.
The reason the iPhone SE could in fact be, in my opinion, the best iPhone ever is because it is without question not only the best budget iPhone Apple has ever released, but also the most consumer friendly, by a long shot. Not only was this phone replacing the 5S and refreshing the internals to be on par with the newest iPhone 6S, but it also, and get this, only cost $399, $50 less than the 5S cost the day before the announcement of the SE. Special edition indeed. The SE felt like a celebration of Apple's beloved iPhone design and successfully managed to not only be in a prime position as the obvious upgrade for users who preferred smaller phones. If you had a 5S, the SE was the natural next step up, but it was also just great for those who wanted a better value device, something a bit cheaper than the 6S, but basically just as good. And with the SE, you were still getting all the essential big features of the headlining flagship. It would have been so easy for Apple to simply update the iPhone 5C's design and have a plastic $400 phone, but I'm not going to give them too much credit for opting for the 5S design instead, because I actually don't think using the 5C design was really too much of an option from their perspective. The 5C had developed a poor reputation as a complete commercial failure, really the only failed iPhone to this point, and the colorful polycarbonate design, while impressive in its own right, never captured that premium, luxurious element that Steve Jobs had always ensured was driven home with every Apple product released. Apple isn't like the other brands. They don't sell you cheap plastic phones like Samsung. Oh no, they're special. They make high quality stuff. And if you're buying something with that Apple logo, you know you're getting your money's worth. Is that a fair perspective? Yes and no. I mean, Apple's made some pretty crappy products before, but generally, I'd say they're pretty good in the design department. And the point is, the idea of a premium design is intrinsically linked to what Apple and iPhone are as a brand. If the consumer's view of Apple falters, they're going to be more likely to avoid whatever they perceive as a subpar product. The 5C was really well built, but because plastic was used in a post-iPhone 4 world, it was never going to be seen as a device worthy of the prestige the Apple logo is supposed to represent. All this to say that the 5C's design, while not at all inherently bad, was of course viewed very poorly, and Apple really should have seen it coming. The iPhone 5 and 5S design, on the other hand, well, now these phones were beloved, and arguably still to this day stand as the most beautifully designed and well-crafted smartphones of all time. I mean, they're gorgeous, just look at these phones. They were incredibly lightweight and comfortable in the hand, with that simple unibody aluminum boxy build, with that perfect contrast of the glass antenna bands running across the back. And there wasn't any negative stigma around the durability of these phones either. Yes, the glass could crack on the back, sure, but it was a lot better than the iPhone 4, and it's not like the iPhone 6 with the whole bend gate fiasco. These were solidly built iPhones, plain and simple, with a display size easily usable with one hand. If it was the Apple of today, well, actually I still don't think they'd use the 5C design because that phone was such a flop. But what was every bit as important as having a design that fit the bill for an audience otherwise ignored by the rest of the smartphone market was making this phone be a genuine upgrade over that iPhone 5S that they had just been selling for $450. Not only that, but it needed to be priced low enough to properly hit that budget to mid-tier market. So, if it was the Apple of today, we would probably have seen the A8 chip from the iPhone 6, maybe an upgrade to the RAM, and then the same old camera sensor from the iPhone 5S. And it would have cost probably $500, let's be real. Or if not that, it certainly wouldn't have been just $50 cheaper than the 5S had cost. Maybe it would stay at $450. And hey, maybe we do get the A9 from the 6S. But the fact that not only did we get that newest, most impressive chipset, but also the exact same 12-megapixel camera sensor on the rear, a huge step up from not only the 5S but also the iPhone 6? 6. If you felt I was too harsh on the iPhone 16e earlier, remember what Apple has given to us in the past. It is okay to demand more from them. They've proved they're capable of making devices with flagship specs at incredibly reasonable price tags. They just don't do it anymore. But again, this was sort of the perfect storm surrounding the SE, and Apple had all the parts and assembly lines for the 5S well established, keeping manufacturing costs low. And seeing how poorly that 5C sold, a phone that cheaped out and didn't include the newer specs of the 5S, Apple may have felt like they had no choice but to make this phone a legitimate flagship for 2016, and staggering the releases meant it didn't take away sales from the 6S, at least from the get-go. And again, this was really a flagship level device with upside beyond just the price tag over the 6S. Battery life, believe it or not, was actually better on this tiny phone than the 4.7-inch iPhone 6S, and barely worse than the huge 5.5-inch 6S Plus. And the SE only cost just over 60% of the smaller 6S. Apple did need to cut corners somewhere to keep the price down, and what you would gain in getting the 6S were features like the much faster second generation Touch ID, an upgraded selfie camera, and of course 3D Touch, and we'll be shortly looking closer at the 6S. But one problem both the 6S and the SE had was the starting storage being only 16 gigabytes, which was already pretty rough for the mid-2010s and would only get much worse in future years with more and more software updates. And we did get a whole lot of software updates, all the way from iOS 9 to iOS 15, 7 major versions, which is still the most we've seen from Apple as of iOS 26. The iPhone 11, 11 Pro, 7 major versions. And those phones came 4 years after the 6S and 3.5 years after the SE. This isn't the best iPhone ever. I love it, and it's again handedly the best budget phone Apple's ever made, and I doubt that ever changes, but for this phone to have worked as well as it did, you needed that perfect storm of circumstance that led to its existence in the first place. The iPhone 5C had proved to Apple they couldn't just release anything and expect it to be a commercial success. They needed to have some real value behind the phone, a lesson they would seem to forget as the years went on, but it was still very much fresh in their minds with the SE. And unlike the 3rd gen iPhone SE, Apple wouldn't just forever leave it at $399 in their lineup in following years, but instead they would adjust the storage and pricing accordingly to keep the value proposition not only competitive but veritably enticing. It would jump from 16 and 64 gigs to 32 and 128 gigs with no price increase, March 2017, and Apple, get this, would actually reduce the price to $350 fall 2017, discontinuing the phone officially fall 2018. But then they would bring it back randomly early 2019 on clearance, $250 for the 32 gig model, $300 for 128, and that inventory went very fast. And sure, while the phone was about 3 years old by this point, it still would have years of continued software support ahead of it, and it never really got slow, albeit battery life, as with all older smartphones, could very much be a pain for users in the long term. So no, the special edition iPhone is not the best iPhone ever, but it does 100% belong in A tier. And unlike its subsequent generations, it is truly special in every conceivable fashion. The iPhone 6S is like the anti-iPhone XS, right down to the phonetic reading of the name, iPhone XS versus iPhone Success. I mean, of course it was going to be great. And it was, fixing basically all the issues with the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus that we'll be examining shortly, with a far stronger aluminum build, along with a plethora of upgrades. The 12 megapixel rear camera, recording 4K 30 video, was awesome, and many of my early YouTube videos were even filmed on my own 6S back in the day. We got live photos, that was kinda neat. The selfie camera got a much needed upgrade to 5 megapixels from only 1.2, and just about everything here has aged really well. How about that rose gold color? That was a welcome addition and set further precedent for Apple gradually getting more and more experimental with their color options. The design itself with those plastic antenna bands in hindsight isn't my favorite, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't love it back in the day when I actually had a 6S in space gray. And this phone also had unofficial water resistance, or in the very least it was better with a splash or two versus previous iPhones, as it was sealed with adhesive. The home button now included 2nd generation Touch ID, which was significantly faster than 1st gen and barely would require you to brush the button with your thumb before it would unlock. Haptics got a lot better this year and would only continue to get better in future iPhones. 3D Touch should be a huge plus for this phone, and it was really innovative tech, with the display being able to detect physical pressure, but of course, Apple never properly utilized it within the software, and its usefulness would eventually evaporate completely from the iOS experience.
Tim told you, these are our most advanced phones ever. In fact, the most advanced phones in the world. Just look at everything embodied in these new phones.
And so, okay, all this on its own makes for a good iPhone, but surely not one worthy of being argued as the best, right? How did this end up making it to round 2? Well, just like with people, it's what's on the inside that counts. The main draw of this phone, and the reason I can see someone making an argument for it being the best iPhone of all time, is because of its longevity and performance over time. 7 major software updates for a smartphone, that's still the record set by the 6S, and only matched by a few iPhones since. With the A9 chipset and 2 GB of RAM, the 6S and 6S Plus got a lot faster. Starting with only 16 gigs of storage was far too little, but in the very least, when the iPhone 7 came out, the 6S, along with a price reduction, did get bumped up to 32 GB. But regardless of how much storage you did opt for, the 6S would still receive updates from iOS 9 all the way to iOS 15. And not only was iOS 15 reasonably smooth on this phone, but it's still receiving occasional security updates. And while updates have clearly slowed down since 2023, the fact that we're getting any at all is incredible. And iOS 15 isn't that old, it's not completely unusable, with relatively recent versions of plenty of apps still available to users. If you had to, you might not like it, but you could get by on just an iPhone 6S. Even though it's been a full decade since the phone released, that is ludicrously impressive. This phone probably holds up better than most Windows laptops from the same year, especially with Windows 10 support recently ending. And don't forget, the iPhone 7 from the next year, yeah, it also got stuck on iOS 15 forever. And the iPhone 8 and 8 Plus and the iPhone 10 from 2017, they got to iOS 16. While this is not the most exciting or mind-blowing iPhone we've ever seen, the 6S and 6S Plus are just some of the most solid phones Apple's ever made, and the rectification of many of the iPhone 6's problems made for a far better experience than that phone. I believe A tier is totally justified. I don't think this is something that can really be argued as the best iPhone of all time, and I could see an argument for high B tier as well, but 10 years of continued updates on a smartphone of all things and headphone jack, I mean, come on. It's hard not to love this phone, at least for me.
These are the new iPhones, the iPhone 6 and the iPhone 6 Plus. They are without a doubt the best iPhones we've ever done. And I hope you'll agree, they're the best phones you have ever seen.
The iPhone 6 and 6 Plus are the best worst iPhones of all time, or perhaps the worst best iPhones of all time. We can debate on how we might categorize them, but there's no question this phone managed to do so much right and so much wrong simultaneously that it is genuinely impressive. Let's start with what makes this phone the best, and the reason it sold well over 220 million units. By 2014, the smartphone market was starved for a phablet iPhone after years of competitors like Samsung making huge strides and finding great success in their own blends of tablets and phones with devices like the Galaxy S and Note series. Phones like the S3 and S4 were genuine threats to Apple's market share, and it forced them to reconsider their longtime stance of a smartphone always being usable with a single hand. The way we used smartphones was fundamentally evolving at a pace so rapid that Apple really wasn't able to keep up. Truthfully, they should have had a phablet option in 2013, and had that been the case, Samsung may never have gained the ground that they did. But the iPhone 6 finally got bigger, and it got way bigger too, no half measures like with the iPhone 5.
4.7 inch for iPhone 6, 5.5 inches for iPhone 6 Plus. And boy, are they packed with pixels.
So, big iPhone, big sales. And this design, with the comfortably rounded edges and corners, would stick around all the way until early 2025 with the discontinuation of the 3rd generation iPhone SE. Glass back, sure, but that phone fundamentally was still basically just an iPhone 6, at least from the front. And the fact that the iPhone 6 was so well designed that its blueprint can still make for a very usable experience now over a decade later is something I doubt many would have expected in 2014. I mean, just look at what smartphones were in 2004 for some perspective here. That's what makes the iPhone 6 the best. The core design was so incredibly solid and future-proof, and large enough to fit everything we wanted to consume on our phones. What makes the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus the worst is, well, basically everything else. Okay, that might be a bit of an exaggeration, but let's start with the spec sheet and then we'll get into the controversy. Realistically speaking, the iPhone 6 was basically just a bigger iPhone 5S, bringing almost nothing new of any substance over that device, mostly. We did get NFC and Apple Pay, which is, awesome. And obviously the phone getting bigger was the entire appeal here anyways. They really didn't need any major jumps in photography or power because the 5S was such a solid foundation to work off of. The 6 Plus did have optical image stabilization for the first time, which was a relatively new feature to smartphones from around this era. We also also got 1080p 60 video and 240 frames per second slow-mo in 720p. When it came to the actual horsepower though, things get a bit more dicey. The 5S was a really big jump with the A7 chipset, the first 64-bit architecture in a smartphone, and so it made sense the iPhone 6's A8 chip really wouldn't improve a whole lot. And only 1GB of RAM still. Not great, but sure, iOS is well optimized anyways, unless you're using an iPhone 4S at least, heaven forbid. Of course, Apple acted like the iPhone 6 was significantly faster than the 5S, but this was really never the case. And for the first time in iPhone history, this phone would not get an extra year of software support over its predecessor, with the 5S, 6, and 6 Plus all ending up on iOS 12, with their latest security update as of making this video coming back in early 2023. I do want to emphasize how unprecedented this was. iPhones had only been on an upward trajectory for how long they would receive support, and I think it's a reasonable expectation for anyone buying a new iPhone to assume that their device will last at least a year longer than an iPhone from the previous year, especially if you were upgrading from the 5S to the 6, and then they end up on the same version at the end of the day. Seems kind of crazy. Now, this being said, I'm not mad at this at all, and while we can look at the iPhone 6 negatively for not having as long a life as the 5S, I more see it as Apple actually just being reasonable and not giving the phone more updates than it could handle. That single gigabyte of RAM was a huge bottleneck, and iOS 12 actually runs pretty decently on the 2014 hardware, just like it does on the iPhone 5S. This was an update specifically designed to speed up performance on older hardware, which was awesome to see back in 2018. I would much rather the iPhone 6 get one less year of updates rather than becoming any slower than it needed to be. 5 major software versions for a 2014 smartphone far surpasses any of the Android competition of the era. So basically the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus weren't so much disappointing in technical upgrades as the iPhone 5S was just way ahead of the game. And none of it really mattered because everything revolving around the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus would hinge on one single element, its design. And I guess we do have to discuss Bendgate and touch disease, as much as I maybe would rather not.
iPhone 6 is just 6.9 millimeters thin compared to 7.6 for the 5S, and the 6 Plus 7.1, both thinner than any phones we've ever made. That took an incredible amount of engineering.
The iPhone 6 and 6 Plus were the thinnest iPhones ever, and even to this day, the only iPhone thinner than the 2014 iPhone 6 and 6 Plus is the 2025 iPhone Air, so admittedly, this build was extremely impressive. Except phones can only get so thin without compromise being present. On the iPhone Air, we see the drawbacks in a smaller battery and only a single camera lens on the rear. For the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus, the consequences would be far, far worse, with the phones using a relatively weak grade of aluminum that, with not much more than minimal pressure, could end up bending, and carrying it in your pocket with maybe some tighter pants could potentially be enough for you to end up with the world's first foldable smartphone. The bending was generally just a cosmetic issue, or at least that's what it seemed to be initially, but it turns out it didn't really take too much for a certain connector inside the phone to become loose, causing the infamous touch disease that would render your iPhone 6, even if it didn't appear bent or damaged from the outside, to be completely functionally useless with the touchscreen not responding anymore. This design was flawed from the get-go, and let's be clear, touch disease was not some uncommon outlier issue, nor was it one of simple inconvenience like AntennaGate for the iPhone 4. If this happened to you, you had little recourse outside of either paying to get the phone repaired or attempting to repair it yourself. Bendgate wasn't the main issue, but rather an early indication of the overall poor quality build and lack of durability. And Apple's response to this: pretend nothing is wrong, the phone is completely fine guys, it's all good, and they would admit nothing. The only response they would give is that any bending was extremely rare with regular usage, except those persisting touchscreen issues would become more and more prevalent over time, leading to lawsuits against Apple with court documents revealing they fully knew the iPhone 6 was absolutely susceptible to bending, they just didn't care. Again, we ended up with repair programs and yada yada. Look, this phone had its issues, we get it, but it's still the highest selling smartphone of all time by a long shot, and there is good reason for it. The iPhone 6 and 6 Plus were really great phones, and exactly what the market demanded in 2014. People wanted a bigger iPhone, and they got a bigger iPhone. It's just too bad Apple's highest selling phone also just so happened to have the most hardware issues. And the design itself, it has its merit. I'm not a big fan in hindsight with those plastic antenna bands again, but it was well enough received at the time. I've just come to view it as not as premium looking compared to the iPhone 4 and 5 designs that came before. At the end of the day, the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus can be argued as the best iPhones of all time, but they also sucked, and they could be argued to be the absolute worst, so I think it's only fair to place them in C tier, as they failed to move on to the next round. Yes, C tier, maybe it seems harsh, but considering Bendgate, if anything, it's maybe a bit generous. The iPhone 5S is everything you could ever want from an S model iPhone, and so much more. Building off the brilliant and beautiful iPhone 5, Apple wasn't quite yet ready to unleash their own phablets onto the world. But in fairness, many of their users at the time simply weren't interested in larger phones anyways, even if this sentiment would become less and less the consensus leading up to the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus, which again would be the best-selling smartphone models of all time. And while it might seem straightforward enough to purely credit the abundant sales solely to the size of the 6 and the 6 Plus, the truth was there's more to it than just that, though it most certainly was a major factor. And perhaps unsurprisingly, the iPhone 6S and 6S Plus actually slot in as the second best-selling smartphones of all time, with approximately 174 million units shipped. But then in third place, despite the small form factor, we have the iPhone 5S, itself selling just under 165 million units. And this is made all the more impressive when you consider the fact that the 5S had only one single size option, and then the iPhone 5 isn't too far behind at 146 million units sold, and it just goes to show how big smartphones were getting around this time. You've also got the likes of the Galaxy S3 and S4 hitting the best numbers of any Android phone ever at around 70 million units apiece. The iPhone 4S from 2011 would sell 60 million, the iPhone 4 50 million. These are numbers that were once unimaginable only a few years prior. The adoption rate for smartphones were climbing rapidly in the early 2010s, and with entries into the market as strong as Apple's early iPhones, it's no surprise they would see such commercial success. And the iPhone 5S, as you've likely already guessed, is absolutely deserving of making it to the third round for a plethora of reasons we'll be getting into later on, and it just may in fact be the best iPhone of all time. Of course, there could be no iPhone 5S without the iPhone 5, and what an iPhone this was, marking the end of the Steve Jobs era as we knew it, shipping on iOS 6, the final version to utilize the original skeuomorphic design. And iOS 6 itself brought some minor refreshes to some of the UI too, with the music app for example getting overhauled from iOS 5, which to me implies that had Steve Jobs still been around, maybe we would never see the iOS 7 redesign, but perhaps the skeuomorphism would have instead been maintained and refined in the coming years as a continuing core part of iOS's identity. All we can do is speculate, and whichever way, in the very least we can look back fondly at this iPhone as one of the most beautiful smartphones we've ever seen. And that snappy iOS 6 software is just so nostalgic it hurts. The A6 chip and full gigabyte of RAM made for solid performance that allowed the iPhone 5 to get updates all the way to iOS 10 as previously discussed, and it wasn't half bad on that final update at all. Not fast, but not super slow either, certainly far better than the iPhone 4 and 4S ended up. However, it wasn't the tech specs or camera that really impressed with this phone so much as it was that new design, arguably the biggest redesign we'd ever seen on iPhone to this point. And, well, what can't be argued is that this in fact was physically the largest new iPhone design we'd ever seen, with the Retina display increasing to 4 inches from 3.5, and the phone specifically getting taller, not wider, presenting a more modern 16:9 ratio, and giving an early indication of how smartphones would continue to evolve over time as the verticality would just keep increasing in the future.
A phone should feel great in your hand, and more importantly, should be easy to use with this magical device we all carry called a horizontally opposed thumb. It does most of the hard work for us. So when you carry your phone, it should fit beautifully in your hand. It should be easy to send messages, type emails, surf the web, and that's just how we designed iPhone 5.
This phone was built for ease of use, with your thumb able to reach all 4 corners of the screen, something that generally cannot be said for most smartphones of today. And people were thrilled for this larger display, even if it was still rather small compared to the up-and-coming phablets seen in the ever-growing Android competition. But even just this small display size increase would be a monumental factor in the iPhone 5 hitting those massive sale numbers, made all the more impressive by the fact that this phone was only available for a single year, discontinued fall 2013 in favor of the new iPhone 5C.
It is really easy to make a new product that's bigger. Everyone does that. That's not the challenge. The challenge is to make it better and smaller.
One of the major challenges with this phone Apple was presented with after they blew away any and every other smartphone design on the market with the glass and stainless steel iPhone 4 was that their next numbered model would not only have to live up to the same expectations, but also exceed them. There was room for refinement with the iPhone 4's design, to be sure, but there was now more pressure than ever for Apple to continually bring out new, fresh, and even better designs with subsequent generations. And while some of the changes made here would have been pretty obvious for them to do, like the screen getting a bit bigger and the phone getting both lighter and thinner, Apple still had to make it happen in a way that not only had the iPhone 5 on par with the iPhone 4 in terms of design quality, but ideally, again, even exceeding the standard that had previously been set. And against all odds, Apple somehow once again outdid themselves with this unbelievably premium and beautiful aluminum unibody design with these gorgeous glass antenna bands stretching across the top and bottom of the back of the phone. The iPhone 4 with its glass back wasn't chosen purely for aesthetic, but of course the glass of the iPhone 4 and 4S would bring its own set of problems, no matter how nice it might look, as even a short drop to the ground could shatter the back entirely. Aluminum was a smart choice due to both its lightweight nature and durability, and limiting the glass to the antenna bands only meant that any risk of cracking was reduced significantly, even if it still could happen, and the end result was probably the most beautiful smartphone design of all time. And I think it's no coincidence that smartphones today don't look a whole lot different from this, with the iPhone 12 bringing back that sort of boxier look. There's a reason it's stuck around. Combine this with the all-new Lightning connector replacing the 30-pin chargers of old, and the iPhone 5 of course being significantly thinner and lighter than previous iPhones. It is crazy light. It all felt so fresh, so modern, and somehow Apple had managed to outdo themselves once again. Gone were the days of sticking your charger in the wrong way. And as we know, Lightning would stick around for a very, very long time. Too long actually, as it would be another 11 years before Apple would switch to USB-C. There were only two color options with the iPhone 5, as was standard for the time. There was white and silver or black and slate. That slate color in particular is very unique within Apple's history, as it had this almost blue hue to it and was really nice until you accidentally scratched or chipped the paint off, which it turns out could happen really easily. Apple would have to remedy this the next year with the iPhone 5S moving to space gray instead, and the darker black and slate would disappear from their lineup altogether. As much as I did love that color, it is very understandable, as the slate iPhone 5s have generally aged much worse than their silver counterparts. It really does not take much at all for them to get scuffed up over time. So all in all, the iPhone 5 was an amazing package and one of the best iPhones we have ever seen for sure. But is it the best? Well, in my opinion, no it's not. Don't get me wrong, it is a very high A tier, but the innovation brought here mostly began and ended with that new design and 4-inch display. Listen, we're going into the final round. The competition is tough and only one iPhone can be the ultimate winner. I wouldn't blame anyone for regarding the iPhone 5 as the best iPhone of all time, but for me, it's just not quite great enough. Man, I do love me some iOS 6 on that iPhone 5 though. That skeuomorphism on the 4-inch Retina display is just breathtaking. It wasn't the first, but the fourth iPhone not only is the only iPhone to ever actually be properly named. Seriously, the iPhone 5 was the sixth iPhone, and it all just kind of went off the rails from there. But it also brought more innovation than possibly any subsequent generation, and is the last time I think it is a 100% objective fact, in my opinion, which is contradictory, but ignore that Apple was far and away well ahead of the rest of the smartphone industry. The iPhone X was obviously amazing, as was the 5S, but both of those phones can still pretty well be argued to, at least in some areas, still be lacking compared to some competitors of the time. The iPhone 4, I don't really think it was. If you look at any other smartphone from 2010, with the lack of any Retina display and the much cheaper looking designs, they feel like they're from a different world than the iPhone 4. And of course, there are flaws with this phone, as always. Its small size didn't age so well, it was pretty slow on iOS 7, and of course, AntennaGate was a thing. But we'll save all that talk for the next round, because if any iPhone deserves to be in the best ever conversation, it's gotta be the final one presented by Steve Jobs.
Every once in a while, a revolutionary product comes along that changes everything.
And last, but most certainly not least, we come full circle back to the iPhone that started it all. As implied way at the beginning of this video, I don't think this phone can reasonably be considered the best iPhone ever. In a certain sense, it'd be like calling the first automobile the best car ever because it was the most innovative and set in motion all that would follow. Okay, maybe it's not quite like that, because smartphones did already exist, but the iPhone 2G scrapped almost everything and came up with something so new and frankly way better and more intuitive than anything else on the market. With the first iPhone, you can see that most of what makes a smartphone today a smartphone is already here. The grid layout of iOS, many of the apps and features still considered essential, and even the design in a lot of the operating system in terms of how it's displayed and functions is already present. I mean, look at the settings screen. Does this not feel awfully familiar? It is astonishing Steve Jobs and his team were able to come up with and design so many elements of the software that really had never existed before, and do such a good job that almost 20 years later, there are plenty of aspects of the iPhone that are virtually unchanged. An example I love is just how the multi-touch functionality was implemented, which on its own, of course, was huge. The touchscreens that were around before this generally would require a stylus if you wanted any level of precision, and the actual software on those smartphones were far more complicated and confusing to use. But the iPhone, now this was a phone that just made sense. Check out the crowd's reaction here when Steve Jobs just starts scrolling.
I'm an artist right now. Well, how do I scroll through my list of artists? How do I do this? I just take my finger and I scroll. That's it.
This right here, this was new. This hadn't been done before. And you see how the scrolling doesn't just stop as soon as he lifts his finger? There's momentum, so you don't need to constantly keep readjusting and moving your finger up and down. You just make little swipes and it does the rest. And there's this little bounce when it hits the bottom, making the movement all feel so natural. It made sense, and it's exactly why the first iPhone was so important. It figured out all of the hard stuff that needed to be figured out. It wasn't a huge commercial success, at least relative to even Apple's iPod sales at the time, and of course how many iPhones would end up selling in the future. And there were plenty of issues with the iPhone 2G, like, well, 2G networking wasn't exactly future-proof. The camera was pretty bad, and while phone cameras all kind of sucked back then, there was nothing here that made this one special. The first iPhone was also very expensive, at least relative to most cell phones of the time, so there was some definite sticker shock for customers. Although Apple would adjust the price multiple times throughout the first year, which had its own drama, the phone's design is very unique, and I do have a lot of love for it, but it doesn't feel nearly as refined or beautiful as iPhones that would come really with the iPhone 4 and beyond, and that's because it's simply not. It was meant to be more functional. In terms of how the iPhone 2G aged, well, it wasn't great. I'd say back in 2007, you would have been better off waiting at least a little while before jumping on the iPhone bandwagon. The App Store wouldn't hit until 2008, and that would revolutionize not just the tech world, but how the world works at large, to be honest. An online marketplace where literally anyone could develop and upload their own app, it was brilliant, and there was truly nothing like it beforehand. The specs here are of course very much of the era, and well, mobile phone hardware in 2007 was obviously limited, and as a result the first iPhone is brutally slow on iPhone OS 3. Yeah, it wasn't called iOS until iOS 4. Even getting a couple big updates though was still plenty more than you might have expected for the time, and I think it's only fair to cut this device a whole lot of slack when it comes to performance. We could talk about the iPhone 2G for a very long time, because it brought so much. It is a historical icon and the framework for what smartphones would become. The fact that this phone even exists to begin with is an absolute miracle. There are some legendary stories about the engineers getting completely wasted while Steve Jobs was presenting the phone back in January 2007 because they were so terrified that it would crap out on stage. Jobs had to keep swapping phones and do things in a very specific pattern to avoid crashing, and against all odds, they pulled it off without a hitch. And 6 months later, the phone was released to the world, and to say it changed everything would be a wild understatement at best. Ultimately, I am placing the first iPhone into S tier, but it's not going to move on to the next round. iPhone would only continue to improve and build upon its foundation, and it is 100% the most important smartphone, and really one of the most important inventions the world has ever seen. But it is not the best iPhone, and that is a very good thing, because it was never meant to be. It was simply the first.
I skate to where the puck is going to be, not where it has been. And we've always tried to do that at Apple, since the very, very beginning. And we always will.
And And now we come to the final round, with only 3 iPhones remaining. The iPhone 4, iPhone 5S, and iPhone 10. All of these iPhones could be considered the best of all time, as could really any of the models we just spoke about. There is no objective answer here, but that's okay, because if there was, then what would be the point of this video? Looking back at the video I made 7 years ago, it's interesting to see that our top 3 has not changed. I'm not shocked by this, of course, but I was hoping to walk away with maybe some different conclusions, because, well, what does it say if the top 3 hasn't changed after Apple has practically doubled the amount of iPhones in the world? What does it say about myself if my opinions are still steadfast in what I was saying when I was just barely out of high school? Like, this was a long time ago. However, when you think about it, it makes sense for things to turn out this way and for us to potentially end up at the exact same answer as before, which we'll find out soon whether or not that's the case. But iPhones today, to beat those earlier models out as potentially the best of all time, they have a much higher bar to clear. The more time that passes, the less novel and innovative smartphones get, because they've existed for so long, and we've already come so far. The iPhone 4, 5S, and the 10, they all did things that had never really been done before, but at this point we're so far down the road there's very little room for anything truly special to come along. It's funny, if I had more time for this video, I would love to put together a compilation of every time Apple has said that their new iPhone is the best iPhone ever. It is practically a cliche, and yes, Tim, I sure hope your newest $1,100 iPhone is better than the previous generation, but of course what we mean when we say best is highly contextual, and I think I'd get some pretty angry comments if I just said the iPhone 17 Pro was the best because, duh, it's the newest and it has the best specs, guys. You think the iPhone 10 is better than it? Look how small the camera is. Are you dumb? It's fun, at least for me, to compare the old iPhones with the new because while there are certain things we can directly compare, like how innovative or how big a jump each new generation is over what came before, there's still a lot we really can't directly compare, and we also don't know how these new iPhones will age. Maybe the 17 Pro will get updates for 20 years. I think that would put it ahead of a lot of the phones we talked about today. Is that going to happen? No, it's not, obviously, but nobody thought the iPhone 5S would get 6 major updates, the 6S 7, or then again, maybe a big hardware issue will come along for the 17 Pro in a year or two that makes all of them functionally useless. When I look at the current iPhone lineup, I might be happy with it overall, mostly, and feel like Apple is, again, mostly heading in the right direction. They do need a much better budget phone, but you know, even when I'm happy with a new iPhone, it's still not the same feeling I used to get every September whenever Tim Cook would walk on stage and wish me a good morning. We've heard it all before. There's nothing new under the sun, or at least nothing new to the same level we saw with the 3 phones we'll be looking at shortly. The iPhone Air shows that, in the very least, Apple hasn't fully given up on trying to innovate and make a different kind of iPhone. But Steve Jobs, the amazing thing about him as a visionary, he was never satisfied just looking to make the next best Macintosh or the next best iPod. It was the next big thing in general. Even with iPhone, he didn't stop there. iPad was the next step. And it's that sort of creativity and ability to think outside of the box and the confines of existing product lines that modern Apple sorely lacks today. The Vision Pro, I had to mention it. It's one of the only actual new things they've come up with since Jobs passed. And well, we all know how that's gone so far. Apple's even managed to completely drop the ball when it comes to AI. Despite how well set up for the future they should have been, with Siri in 2011 being pretty darn impressive for the time. I mean, she had lots of room to improve, but then she never really did. And I wonder who pushed to purchase the company behind Siri to have it built into iPhone in the first place. What's that? Steve Jobs called up the founders mere weeks after they launched their original app and didn't rest until he persuaded them to sell and have the tech integrated into the 4S? Hard to imagine Apple falling behind in the AI boom had Jobs still been around. And who knows, maybe AI would have taken a more positive direction than the whole stealing from artists thing we see today and all the other controversy about AI. This all being said, Steve Jobs was only one man, and a man who just so happened to get a lot of things right a lot of the time. But he was still fallible because he was a man, and he made many mistakes himself. There are plenty of brilliant minds who work for Apple today, and they have consistently managed to put out incredible products year after year. Yes, there have been some rough spots too, but at least when it comes to iPhone, for the most part, even the bad iPhones still tend to be pretty good. I might complain about something like the iPhone 14, but half of my family probably owns an iPhone 14. I might look at it and say, well, this is barely any different from the 13, but as an average consumer, do they care? Well, of course not, because they just need a good phone, and it is a good phone. What's also interesting to me is when I made that video in 2018, the iPhone 10 had only been out for a year, and yet there I was, boldly proclaiming that it was already one one of the best iPhones ever. Seems maybe a bit premature looking back, but I mean, I think I was right. I mean, the iPhone X has its flaws, to be sure, but it was the last time, in my opinion, Apple had by and far the best and most impressive smartphone on the market. And these days, it's tough to ever rank one phone above the other. I don't see the point of saying whether or not the iPhone 17 Pro is better than the newest Samsung Galaxy. Just get the phone you want. They're both great. And hey, I looked at a couple of their new phones this year. The Galaxy Z Fold 7 is unlike anything I had ever used. It was awesome. And the Flip 7 had its merit too, though I felt it was a bit more gimmicky rather than genuinely useful. Both phones, though, were fun, and I don't think it's a stretch to make the assumption a foldable iPhone is probably on the way. But whenever it does happen, I don't think it'll live up to the same level as the iPhone X, because this is a case where Apple won't be first. The first Galaxy Fold came in 2019, and yeah, I mean, it had a lot of issues, but still, 2019. I don't know if this is a video subject we will ever revisit, because I don't know if we'll ever need to. But what I do know is that for now, we have our top 3, and it's about time we figure out which one of them is truly the best. Starting with the first iPhone I ever personally purchased brand new.
Hey guys, what's up? It's Josh from 91 Tech, and here it is. Finally, guys, I got the iPhone X.
I was so hyped for the iPhone X. This might be the final time I ever felt true joy, and there really was such a special feeling surrounding the iPhone X when it launched. For one thing, it had been talked about in rumors relentlessly leading up to the September 2017 unveiling, and then it wouldn't even hit stores until November, with Apple needing that extra time to meet demand. But even then, they would struggle for months to deliver units to customers. The iPhone X did feel rushed, but in the best possible way. Like Apple had done anything and everything to give us something we had never seen before anybody else could beat them to it. Now yes, there were phones already shrinking down their bezels and pushing the boundaries of what these displays could be. The Galaxy S8 was a notable example, but the iPhone X didn't just match that phone and others like it. It leapfrogged everything, taking the lead with a display that one could truly consider edge-to-edge, or about as close to it as you could reasonably get in 2017. The lack of any sort of chin was for the years the hardest thing for Android phones to replicate. The bezels surrounding that gorgeous new 5.8-inch OLED panel, one built by Samsung by the way, so you know it was good, they were symmetrical, with only the notch at the top intruding the otherwise seamless screen. Like the iPhone 5, the iPhone X's display got taller, getting rid of the top and bottom bezels obviously, as well as the home button, and the result was fitting much more vertical content, which as we know, kinda was the way smartphones were headed. And as much as that notch got clowned on, it may have just been the most brilliant move Apple could have made. For one thing, the top of your phone, by this point in time, really had nothing going on except for the clock, battery icon, network status, and so on. Unless you're on Android and you have like a trillion things up there, but you get the idea. You didn't need all this space for just that information, and there was wasted room, so just move it all to the corners, and bam, the notch really wasn't an inconvenience, outside of maybe watching full screen video or anything in that sort of situation where it was actually cutting into content. Some may have considered it an eyesore, but anyone who used one of these phones will know that it blended into the experience almost immediately, because iOS was built around the notch, unlike notches from certain other phones that were sort of just slapped on because it was the trendy thing. And most importantly, the notch had far more usefulness than just hosting the speaker and selfie camera. It had Face ID, Apple's answer to replace Touch ID with the removal of the home button. There were a lot of mock-ups I remember of dummy iPhone X units with a fingerprint sensor on the rear, and can we just say thank you Apple for not going this route? Like seriously, this would have sucked compared to what we got and probably would have been kinda ugly. Face ID, at least to me, is so far superior to Touch ID, and whenever I've switched to an Android phone with a fingerprint sensor, I always find myself annoyed and missing just how seamless and straightforward my iPhone was when it came to unlocking the phone. No wiping your hand on your jeans because it's a little wet and the reader won't read it. No struggling to find the sensor like you might with a phone that has it in an awkward place. You just look at your phone, which you're gonna do anyways, and it looks right back, unlocking with ease. Early Face ID was slower and less versatile than it is today, to be sure, but even back in 2017, it was already pretty impressive and close to on par with the speeds of Touch ID right off the bat, if not just as fast. It also allowed for portrait mode selfies, which were pretty hit and miss but a novel feature, and there was some other stuff added this year too, like wireless charging, fast charging, though you would need to buy a brick separately of course. And hey, both of those camera sensors are optically stabilized now. What I really loved more than anything with the iPhone X though was the design of the phone. It was just gorgeous front to back. The high resolution OLED, the glass and stainless steel, only 2 color options in silver silver and space gray, just like the good old days of iPhone. Coming from the aluminum phones of the past few years, the iPhone X just felt like it was on a whole nother level. The vertical camera bump hosting those dual 12-megapixel sensors stands out with that stainless steel ring around the darkened glass, a starkly different approach than the trifecta of lenses introduced with the 11 Pro onwards. When I look at that silver iPhone X with that curved, polished stainless steel frame contrasting with the beautifully reflective glass and Apple logo, and then I look at my very orange aluminum iPhone 17 Pro with its giant camera plateau and interesting ceramic shield below it. I don't know, I don't hate the iPhone 17 Pro design at all, I actually quite like it, but to me, these designs are nowhere near the same level of quality. The iPhone X looks like a device that would have been released in the Steve Jobs era of Apple, and that's absolutely an intentional choice with a return to materials used with the iPhone 4. The iPhone 17 Pro, on the other hand, just doesn't hit nearly as hard for me. I like it, but I don't love it the same way I loved my iPhone X. The iPhone Air, of course, pushes a far more premium design that actually does give me some iPhone X vibes when I was holding the white one in my hand, and it's a phone that seems to be pushing the boundaries sort of similar to how the iPhone X did all those years ago, but it's just not the same thing because it's not the best iPhone. The 17 Pro is far better, and even the cheaper 17 is better. The Air has too much compromise, and let's be real, a thin phone is cool and all, but it's not exactly something we need. The iPhone X is what we needed at the exact right time. The iPhone X wasn't just different for the sake of being different, and it didn't just push one single gimmick like the iPhone Air does. It overhauled every single aspect about what iPhones were and what they would become down the road, setting up the modern age of smartphones as we know it today. Really not a whole lot has changed since that first iPhone X, not really.
One of the ways that I believe people express their appreciation to the rest of humanity is to make something wonderful and put it out there. We work really hard at Apple to create wonderful things, and we hope you love what we've introduced today. I think Steve would be really proud of them.
So we've been pretty positive thus far, and sure, I'm sold. Clearly the iPhone X is the best iPhone ever, right? It's got arguably the best design, set the standard for smartphones of the future, and even just the introduction of gesture navigation alone was a brilliant move. Nobody look up how you navigated BlackBerry OS, by the way, that never happened. But as we hinted at, the iPhone X did feel rushed in a lot of ways. There's the entire AirPower fiasco, the only time modern Apple has shown off a product at an event and then never actually released it. And yes, this is a real prototype, by the way, that I had at one point and actually did work. It was pretty cool, but due to their slight propensity for causing fires, it sadly never came to be, and Apple never should have shown it off to begin with. It was a very strange little blip in their history. You've got the delayed release date, the struggle to keep up with demand, only 2 color options, only 1 size option, and a somewhat confusing name as they skipped the iPhone 9, and worst of all, iOS 11 was a ridiculously buggy mess, and the worst release of iOS I think we've ever seen. Even with update after update, it was still a pretty awful experience until iOS 12 would come out, and it kind of makes sense when you consider that maybe Apple originally planned to solely release the iPhone 8 and 8 Plus in 2017, but ended up pushing to get the iPhone X out that same year to remain competitive within the market. The LCD panels really were very far behind Samsung's OLEDs at this point, and if they had waited another year, the competition amongst bezel-less smartphones would have been far more fierce. But Apple didn't wait, and so because of that, they needed to now get something as major and comprehensive as an entirely new gesture navigation system working, along with all of the unique functionality that was coming to the iPhone X. Thankfully, they would prioritize Animoji though. I don't know where we would be without it. As for more flaws, the iPhone X had plenty. The battery life was quite mediocre, and again, only one relatively small size option, which would be remedied the next year, of course, with the iPhone XS Max. The iPhone X also didn't do great for longevity, with that A11 chipset, same as the iPhone 8 and 8 Plus, and all 3 phones would only get to iOS 16. 6 major updates is still plenty impressive and far better than any Android from 2017, but of course, as we know, there are iPhones that have gotten further. The most controversial and hated thing about the iPhone X though, even past the often mocked notch, was naturally always going to be the price tag. $999, the most expensive iPhone ever to this point, and even now, it still stands as one of their priciest entries, as accounting for inflation, $1,000 US in 2017 equates to around $1,300 today, which would put it at least a couple $100 more than the cheapest iPhone 17 Pro. That being said, I do maintain the iPhone X is probably, at least in my opinion, the only iPhone to have cost $1,000, but be truly worth every penny.
This is the future of the smartphone shipping this year. So this is our lineup for the holidays. Now every year we say it's a great lineup for the holidays, and it is. but this year is really special.
Don't get me wrong, I will buy that 17 Pro, maybe crying a little as I do it, but I'll buy it anyways. But still, I can't help but feel like these phones are just a bit too expensive these days. I know, really unpopular opinion there. I am in fact very brave. And I think many of us have kind of just accepted that this is the way things are now, and it's in large part because of the iPhone X. However, that iPhone X was so far ahead of every other iPhone that had ever come before it, as well as I think probably every other smartphone that was out around the time, I feel like it was fully worth that price point. I remember saying it was like holding the future in your hand, and it was. This phone in 2017 really shouldn't have existed yet, but there it is right in my hand, and I bought it going into my senior year of high school, and it would be my first major investment into the YouTube channel that is still my main job today. I don't know if it's this phone or the iPhone 4 that's my favorite, but that old 10, it just meant so much to me, and it still does. This all being said, there are simply too many flaws with the iPhone X for me to call it, for the sake of this video, the best iPhone ever. 999 iOS 11 was a disaster. I'm doing my best to be objective here, an impossible task when the goal is to deliver an answer that will be inherently opinionated, but I'm trying my best all the same. And when I look at the iPhone X compared to the iPhone 4 and the iPhone 5S, this is absolutely an iPhone deserving of S tier, right up alongside those two devices and the iPhone 2G. But I just can't call it the best iPhone ever made. It is easily the greatest iPhone of the modern era though, and obviously very, very influential for every iPhone that's come since and every smartphone really. The iPhone X was a phone that immediately from its launch felt both novel and new because it was, but also so nostalgic. The move back to stainless steel and glass, man, did that ever show just how ahead of the game the iPhone 4 was. To use it again 7 years later. Yeah, I know I said the iPhone 5's design was probably the most beautiful of any phone ever, but I'm just a sucker for the iPhone 4 and iPhone X, what can I say? Even the name, though confusing for those who seemingly don't understand the concept of Roman numerals, which was a lot of people, my goodness, how many times did I hear it called the iPhone X? And it was all Apple's fault, it was a confusing name, but it signified the 10th anniversary of iPhone. And yeah, looking at the first iPhone compared to the one that would come 10 years later, technology certainly looked like it had advanced a decade. The removal of the home button was a critical step in smartphone progress as a whole, and it was Apple bold enough to make it happen with this phone. And while no doubt we will see more innovative iPhones in the future, I can't help but feel we will never see another iPhone on the same level, period. But again, this isn't the best iPhone ever, and we are now left with only two more options, in the iPhone 4 and the 5S. And we're going to start with the 4, a phone that had substantial flaws, but also completely redirected the future of the smartphone industry, and the reason a device like the iPhone X could ever even one day exist to begin with.
Well, first of all, the iPhone 4 comes in two colors, black and white. They are both gorgeous.
If the first iPhone was what set the foundation for the future of the entire smartphone industry, and it was, I think it's fair to say that the iPhone 4 set the template for the future of iPhone itself, and how these devices would continue to evolve. And I also think it's fair to say it was successful. Every single element of what makes iPhone iPhone was present with the iPhone 4, as the phone would represent a fundamental pivot in iPhone's identity, one that I think was only possible under a CEO like Steve Jobs. And if there's one word that can describe the iPhone 4 summing up everything that it brought to the table, I think it would be precision. Not perfection. This is a phone that probably has more flaws than most that we've discussed thus far, but it was very much precise, with the vision behind it propelling all iPhones that would come hereafter. Let's start with what was new with the iPhone 4, and maybe you'll start to see what I'm talking about. Think of what every iPhone since has focused on. For the fourth iPhone, there are 4 core innovations present here, if we are to simplify things: the design, the display, the cameras, and the internal hardware.
This is, beyond a doubt, the most precise thing, one of the most beautiful things we've ever made. Glass on the front and the rear, and stainless steel running around, and the precision of which this is made is beyond any consumer product we've ever seen.
First, the design. Apple would abandon the rounded pebble-like shape of the iPhone 3G and 3GS and step into something far more intentional. Flat glass on the front, flat glass on the back, and a stainless steel band perfectly squared off around the perimeter, its chrome appearance contrasting majestically with the white or black glass backing, though the white would take a while to actually launch because Apple struggled to get the color to even work. Kind of interesting. It's this boxy shape that is held up over the years as the definitive ideal for smartphones, and the glass too was way ahead of the curve as it would also return in the future. It was not only practical, allowing for RF signals to pass through cleanly, but it also brought a level of luxury and premium design that wasn't achievable with the glossy plastic of the iPhone 3G and 3GS. Those designs were practical, functional. The iPhone 4's design was more exact, refined, precise.
Its closest kin is like a beautiful old Leica camera. It's unheard of in consumer products today. Just gorgeous. And it's really thin. This is the new iPhone 4.
The stage of growing pains for iPhone was over. We were in the future now, a world where iPhone was already a success, and Apple had the freedom to not just make a tool, but something you would want to own and show off, something so beautiful it wouldn't look out of place in an art gallery. And that stainless steel frame wasn't simply cosmetic, as it now had the antennas directly integrated. Those little bands you see there, look at any modern smartphone. They'll still have them today, and they all started here. This change allowed Apple to really embrace making something truly beautiful while also pushing the technology forward.
So it's got these integrated antennas right in the structure of the phone. It's never been done before. And it's really cool engineering.
And boy oh boy, were there ever a lot of issues that spawned from this move. I've talked about antenna gates in a video before, maybe a couple years ago, about how the CDMA iPhone 4 didn't suffer from the same issues as the GSM model because of the antenna placement. On that original model, if you held the phone in a certain way, it would drop signal, and while this could generally be solved by maybe using a case or of course just moving your hand, it was an extremely aggravating issue for those affected, and it would be the biggest iPhone controversy to hit until Bendgate years later. Steve Jobs' reaction is really interesting, and it was gone over in Walter Isaacson's book on Steve Jobs, but he wasn't happy, let's put it that way, and you can kind of tell in the presentation he did talking about it. But I do find it notable that while he does downplay the situation and seems visibly annoyed compared to the whole close your eyes and like plug your ears and pretend nothing is happening approach that Apple took with Bendgate, I think it's fair to say this was a far better response. It was more human.
We're not perfect. We know that, you know that, and phones aren't perfect. But we want to make all of our users happy. And if you don't know that about Apple, you don't know Apple. We love making our users happy. That's what drives us to make these products in the first place.
Apple was still a corporation, but they felt much more personal when Steve Jobs was at the helm. And you could tell he just cared so much about the product because he worked so hard on it. In any case, the innovation on display here was still hugely impactful for the future of smartphones and how they would continue to be designed. The glass backing, again, would eventually come back with the need for wireless charging, but that was another element of the phone that had its flaws. As well, glass is glass, and glass can crack. The iPhone 4 is actually probably the most responsible of any phone for the rise of smartphone cases, as all of a sudden you needed one for this device if you didn't want a spider web design on the back. They did exist beforehand, but they weren't yet nearly as universal as they would soon become. And I find that interesting because it's not as if the earlier iPhones didn't have displays that could crack, or end up scratched or dented on the back of the phone if you dropped it, even if they were still of course more durable than a phone with a glass backing. But I think it goes to show when it came to a phone this beautiful, people felt the need to protect it, and there's something to be said about that. After all, a cracked back glass really doesn't affect the user experience, generally speaking, so long as the display is okay. And yet, it feels so wrong. And I think that's because the iPhone 4 as a whole just felt so right. It might feel chunky in the hand today, but it was the thinnest smartphone ever when it released, and the focus on the design didn't end here. If you want another example of Apple's precision, their strive for perfection and attention to detail, just take a look at the inside of the iPhone 4 compared to the inside of the iPhone 3GS. Having a device look just as good on the inside as it does on the outside was a hallmark trait of Steve Jobs, going back to the earliest days of Apple Computer. But the design, that's only core feature number one. Next, we have the all-new Retina display, boasting an unheard of pixel density of 326 pixels per inch. You may find it hard to believe now, but back in 2010, Apple was way ahead of the game, and it would take multiple years before competitors could even match this quality, never mind surpass it. The iPhone 4's screen was not just bright, colorful, and sharp, but it was also now laminated, with the LCD and digitizer glass fused together to bring the entire experience to your fingertips. With earlier iPhones, there was a noticeable gap between the glass you were touching and the content you were seeing, and that was now gone, as well as any significant blue tinting and the poor viewing angles of old. The iPhone 4's screen is small at only 3.5 inches, but if you turn one of these on today, it still looks fantastic and is held up unbelievably well. For this to exist in 2010 already is beyond impressive, and there's a reason Apple just kept making similar Retina Retina displays for so many years until the iPhone X, they just looked that good. This was the turning point when you can no longer easily see the pixels on the screen, and there's no more blurry look to everything. Every other phone felt years behind in comparison, because they were.
Everybody loves to talk about things that are very tangible when it comes to photography, like megapixels. But we tend to ask the question, how do we make better pictures?
Third core feature, cameras. Turns out people really liked taking pictures on iPhone, so Apple embraced this fact fully, upgrading the rear sensor to 5 megapixels, now capable of recording HD video. While high definition by 2010 standards, it was 720p. And hey, there was now a flash too, allowing for pictures even in the darkest of situations. But perhaps the most important addition for photography was seen with the all-new front-facing camera. Oh yeah, FaceTime was new here too, and you can credit the rise of video calling to this phone more than any other. Tap to focus was new with iOS 4, which was a handy feature, and HDR would come in the iOS 4.1 update. The iPhone 4 is where smartphone photography was starting to get good enough to the point that you didn't even need to bring your digital camera around with you anymore, which for you kids out there was a very common thing in the 2000s. But now it was far more convenient to just use the camera you had in your pocket anyways at all times.
The iPhone 4 is powered by the A4 chip. Apple's A4 chip. This is a chip designed by our own team. They are really good, and this is wonderful to have in an iPhone.
And finally, we have the fourth core innovation, the internal hardware. The A4 chip is the first of Apple Silicon, but it was certainly not the last, as we all know how well that would end up panning out for them. The sensors were also expanded with a new gyroscope complementing the accelerometer, allowing for precise detection of movement not previously possible. And there's more here, of course, but we can't cover everything. The software was improving quite rapidly at this time, and it is too bad that iOS 7, which the iPhone 4 would get up to, brutalized the performance of this device, as it was always very snappy on the older versions. But even so, the fact that we got iOS 7 on this phone at all was very much appreciated considering the hype around that update.
Hi YouTube, what's up? It's Hockeyman91 here with a tech review on the iPhone 4, whether it's useful or not in 2014.
If you look back, my first review on this channel was about the iPhone 4 in 2014. The iPhone 4 was my first iPhone, and I've got so much love for it. And I have so much respect for those who worked on and ultimately managed to engineer what I truly consider an absolute masterpiece of hardware design and a work of art, both inside and out. Is the iPhone 4 the best iPhone ever? It's probably the most innovative, in my opinion, at least outside of the first model, and again, it became the template of every iPhone that would come after. It was so far ahead of every other smartphone in 2010 that it's not even really a fair fight. And I know someone will disagree with me there, but like, look at an iPhone 4 and that Retina display and look at any Android from that year. It's not even close. It really isn't. Like with the first iPhone still having plenty of room for improvement, the iPhone 4 was in the same boat. The antenna system, while brilliant, was clearly flawed. The glass backing wasn't durable, and the display, while sharp and way ahead of the game, was still very small. The A4 chip was simply the first step in Apple evolving their hardware, and the long-term performance of the iPhone 4 would be disappointing as it struggled to run the power-hungry iOS 7. The cameras, while far better than what we previously had, still had a very long way to go. Like the first iPhone, the iPhone 4 isn't the best iPhone ever. It was simply the first to really achieve what an iPhone could and should be, and bring together every core aspect of what makes iPhones so special into one cohesive package. This is the iPhone that was now so much more than just a tool. It was an extension of the user, a window into a whole new world that would consume every part of our lives. How many hours of screen time do you have on your smartphone per day? All of that leads back to the first iPhone, sure, but it's the iPhone 4 that really sped things along.
So that is the iPhone 4. And we think it's the biggest leap we've taken since the original iPhone. We're really proud of it. And I think you'll agree there's more to it than met the eye.
The philosophy of iPhone in design, materials, and technical potential, the iPhone 4 was the first to lock it all down and set in motion Apple's direction moving forward. Imagine what iPhones would look like today had Steve Jobs passed before he worked on the fourth iPhone. What incentive would there have been to push the boundaries of design and technical innovation when a more simple plastic iPhone 3GS was already setting milestone sale records? They could have sat on their laurels, they could have kept making plastic phones, but they didn't. The iPhone 4 encapsulates everything great about iPhone. iPhone, even if it came in an imperfect package. And in the wise words of Steve Jobs, there is no perfect iPhone. But there is one more device we have to talk about that I think comes about as close as Apple has ever gotten. And as for the iPhone 4, S tier. The iPhone 5S was 64-bit. Again, this is the first smartphone that ever did it. It had Touch ID, which set the standard for mobile security. It brought iOS 7, the first and only overhaul of iOS that pushed Apple forward into the future. And of course, with the iPhone 5S, we've had over 5 years of full consistent support, something that's never been done before. It wasn't a massive leap forward like the iPhone 4 and the iPhone 10, but it doesn't need to be, and for what it is, I think it's done an amazing job. The 5S just doesn't really have any flaws, and as such, I think it belongs at the top of the iPhone tower without a doubt. And so here it is, my opinion. The 5S is the best iPhone. 7 years and 18 iPhones ago, I made this exact same video. And it was the iPhone 5S that would come out on top as the ultimate winner. And today, I have to say it, I still think the 5S is the best iPhone ever made.
It's packed with incredible technologies that are in service of helping people use these devices more in the ways that we all want to. And it's built in a design that is absolutely the most beautiful, stunning phone design in the industry.
Let's start with the negatives, or rather negative singular, because there's really only one. This was an S model iPhone, bringing no redesign of its own, but simply the design of the iPhone 5. A phone that was rather small, at least by today's standards. But here's the thing, the iPhone 5 was also beautiful, and a masterclass in smartphone design. The 4-inch display was incredibly intentional, as we've discussed, and the 5S would not only refine the design by moving from the easily scratchable black and slate to space gray, a color that has seen a million different variations over the years but saw its origins with this phone, but Apple would also add a third color option for the first time. Not including the 5C of course, because I mean, well, colors was sort of its whole thing. But this one edition in gold would have a ripple effect on the smartphone industry that is still felt to this day. Every other phone manufacturer would very quickly adopt their own version of gold, and it just felt like such a natural fit alongside the silver and space gray with this premium, luxurious vibe that few phones have properly recaptured since. I don't think there is any other word than beautiful that can properly describe its design, and the added refinements from the front only made it all the better. The changes seen here were twofold, manifesting in both hardware and software.
Touch ID uses a key you have with you everywhere you go, your finger. And more specifically, your fingerprint, which is unique to each of us.
We have the first ever Touch ID sensor, which gave us this color-matched, really nice looking ring around the home button that would perfectly complement the rest of the phone. And as iconic as the original home button was, I think most would agree that this was a much cleaner, more refined look. That original rounded square on the home button had the same shape as your app icons to help users intuitively understand what it did. You hit it, and you get to the home screen with all of your icons. It made sense. By 2013, the need for this had long since dissipated, and iPhones, whether you had one or not, had been around for enough time for people to innately understand what that button was going to do. On the first iPhone, it may not have been so obvious for new users coming from a flip phone or some other smartphone with about a million buttons and a stylus, but by 2013, everyone knew what that button did, and the need for the icon was gone. And that innate understanding users had developed also made way for Apple's second big change here, this time on a software level, with the introduction of iOS 7. To this day, by far the most hyped update of iOS we have ever seen.
I think there is a profound and enduring beauty in simplicity, in clarity, in efficiency. True simplicity is derived from so much more than just the absence of clutter and ornamentation. It's about bringing order to complexity. iOS 7 is a clear representation of these goals. It has a whole new structure that is coherent and that is applied across the entire system. We see iOS 7 as defining an important new direction, and in many ways, a beginning.
You are going to absolutely love iOS 7.
Love you.
Thank you.
Personally, I can't help but look back at iOS 6 and earlier with a sense of nostalgia. But in 2013, people were very much ready for something new, something modern.
iOS 7, the biggest change to iOS since the iPhone.
Much of early iOS's design had been predicated on skeuomorphism, a style that brilliantly utilized our intrinsic knowledge of real-life objects to help us understand how these newfangled touchscreens were supposed to work. And it was all really genius when you think about it. What am I supposed to do in this Notes app? Well, it looks like a notebook, so I think I can figure out the rest. The Newsstand app looks like an actual newsstand, the camera, an actual camera lens. Even that old YouTube app icon was an old TV, not the logo for the website. Seeing these things would help users on a subconscious level immediately comprehend what was going on, linking real-life objects and concepts to the design on screen. Even though all of this was completely new and novel at the time, the depth of skeuomorphism and that sort of 3D element to everything, it was beautiful in its own right. But with smartphones becoming more and more prevalent and well understood by the masses, they began to develop almost their own culture and understanding around how it all worked. For example, the YouTube icon is easily recognizable because of how important and vital the platform is on the internet today. So having the app look like an actual TV just isn't necessary, and would in fact add a layer of confusion if anything. We developed habit patterns around smartphones, and skeuomorphism was no longer a helpful prerequisite for users to understand how these devices worked, so much as it was simply an aesthetic, a design language, and a beautiful one at that. But it does make sense that software design would begin to shift in the exact opposite direction in the 2010s, with a move to this much flatter, colorful look with plenty of gradients and more abstract designs. The icon for the Photos app on iOS 7 was still a flower, but had this been the design on the original iPhone, I doubt very many people would have recognized it as such. And it doesn't matter anymore because it's not really a flower so much as it is just the Photos app icon. That's how we recognize it when we see it. So Johnny Ive and Apple now had the opportunity to really embrace their creativity and go as far with the design as they wanted, the result being admittedly very beautiful, though also very flawed, with painfully slow animations, particularly in the very early versions of iOS 7, and the translucency that was everywhere may have looked very pretty, but it was far more demanding for older iPhones like the 4 and caused a whole lot of slowdown and lag on older hardware. Interestingly, we're now seeing the pendulum swing back the opposite way again in design, with Apple's liquid glass interface bringing back some depth and elements of skeuomorphism, blended with this more colorful modern approach we've become accustomed to. I think it's fair to say that a lot of the flatter colors and gradients of design from the past decade has gotten a bit old, and iOS 7, looking at it, it looks out of date. It's not really a design I would want on my current iPhone, but just like with clothing, fashions change over time, as do our tastes and even something as high concept as software design. Point being, iOS 7 is exactly what users wanted in 2013, and it helped to breathe new life into iPhone at the time. And there's a reason that while things have obviously changed quite a lot in the past 12 years, what we have now still looks a whole lot closer to iOS 7 than to iOS 6 and earlier, even if we're seeing some older elements return, like with the camera app icon in iOS 26. Of course, not everyone was pleased with iOS 7 when it came out, but the fast adoption rate showed it was far more popular than not, even if some users were more just curious than anything else. It isn't hard to see why many would compare it to Android, though in a lot of ways I would say it was closer to Windows Phone. Going past just the app icons, every single element of the UI got flatter, and as a result, they do feel less unique to Apple, so I do understand the criticism. And where Apple did clearly pull inspiration from competing platforms was in much of the expanded feature set. iOS 7 was a very important update, modernizing the experience by bringing much needed functionality like the control center and a multitasker that would actually let you see a preview of your opened apps instead of just the icon. That does seem to look like a certain WebOS, doesn't it? Was Apple the first of these sorts of systems? Definitely not, but Apple did have their own spin to it all, and there's this distinctive flow that, while still familiar to the iOS of old, had this entirely fresh vibe. And whether Whether you think this was simply Apple copying Android or otherwise, let's not understate the achievement here that was this visual overhaul at this level. This was the first and only time we've seen any sort of complete radical redesign to Apple's mobile software. And its thoroughness, as well as just how starkly different it was from their previous UI, it's still completely unparalleled by anything else they've done, with even liquid glass feeling less like a new experience, but more like simply a thin coat of paint layered over what we already had. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But you've got to appreciate how bold Apple had to be to push out such a radical, nearly unrecognizable UI with iOS 7, something I don't think they would ever dare attempt to do today, at least certainly no overhaul to this same extent. So, iOS 7 good, got it. Now, I suppose the question must be raised on whether or not we give credit to the iPhone 5S for iOS 7. After all, this update came to the iPhone 4, 4S, and the 5 as well. Plus, the 5C did exist and really went all in on this new colorful modern aesthetic. But I think it's just one more factor on top of many that contributes to the 5S being so memorable within the history of iPhone. Now, while iOS 7 could be pretty buggy and performance was a mixed bag for older iPhones, it always seemed to run really well on the 5S itself, and it was a far better situation than the disaster of iOS 11 with the iPhone 10, for example. Speaking of which, it could very well be because iOS 11 was such a mess that the 5S would get iOS 12, as Apple would have to take a step back and really hone in on making their software perform better across all of their hardware. Not one iOS device would have its life ended on iOS 11, and that wasn't a coincidence. Apple didn't want anyone stuck on it permanently, and thanks to their continued long-term support for these devices, a phone from 2013 would still be on the latest major iOS update until fall 2019, when iOS 13 would release, alongside of course the iPhone 11 Pro and iPhone 11. So unfortunately, while we missed out on, I guess, dark mode for the iPhone 5S and the 6, we still got far further than anyone would have guessed possible in 2013. Good luck finding any smartphone from around the time of the 5S that holds up even half as well. The only thing that's really aged poorly here, I would say, is the size of the phone again, though the 16:9 4-inch Retina display still looks really nice, and while not as vibrant, doesn't suffer from any burn-in issues like the early OLED panels of Samsung phones, that otherwise most would probably say have held up better. But small phone or not, it's thanks to the A7 chipset that we're still talking about the 5S here today, well over a decade later.
A7 is 64-bit. This is the first ever in a phone of any kind. I don't think the other guys are even talking about it yet.
The cameras didn't see any huge upgrades really. The True Tone flash was new, sure. Slow-mo video at 120 frames per second, and the camera itself got larger, which helped in low light. Plus some small things. Digital image stabilization, burst mode, improved automatic HDR, just a lot of pretty standard incremental upgrades. But that A7 chipset was an early example of Apple's engineers flexing their muscles, as this would be the first 64-bit chip in any smartphone. A huge part of the reason why it was able to receive updates for as long as it did, with iOS 11 and higher exclusively requiring a 64-bit architecture. The 5C, for example, still had that 32-bit A6 chip, so it was never going to get the same amount of updates as the 5S. It was behind the times right from its launch, and sure enough, it would be stuck alongside the iPhone 5 on iOS 10. Man, you got screwed if you bought the iPhone 5C at launch. Apple Silicon, starting with the A4 chip in the iPhone 4, has come a long way over the years, culminating in them eventually even moving away from Intel in their Macs, as that M1 chip was way ahead of the game when it first hit in 2020. And the A7 chip is one of the more notable steps along the way to what we have now. Much of what came with the 5S is so familiar to what we have today. Biometrics and Touch ID, which is obviously different from Face ID, but it is still biometrics, something we didn't have, and a major innovation that was so much more convenient than our limited options for security in the iPhone 5 and earlier. Do you remember having to type in your passcode every time you wanted to unlock your phone? Yeah, that sucked, and the 5S was the phone to change it. While Touch ID wasn't the first fingerprint reader on any phone, it was by and far the best, and it would take competitors like Samsung years to catch up to even that first generation. Remember that horrible Galaxy S5 fingerprint reader from 2014 that had you swiping it awkwardly over and over until maybe it would finally work? It's not a stretch to see some symbolic significance in a phone like this at the precipice of smartphones really overtaking society and how the world works, adding something as personalized as Touch ID. This phone again was becoming a further extension of ourselves, to the point that it now recognized our very touch. The iPhone 5S is the culmination and pinnacle of early iPhone design. It marked a turning point, with Apple pivoting to a new, modern generation with iOS 7, biometrics, 64-bit architecture, and even that gold color. All capped off with 6 major software versions and nearly a decade of continued security updates. With that final Steve Jobs era design. A design so great, Apple would bring it back with the special edition iPhone in 2016. And it's through the SE that this design sort of still lives on today, to an extent at least, with that last security update coming as recently as September 2025. The iPhone 5S is as close to a perfect iPhone as Apple will likely ever achieve. As far as I'm aware, there were no major hardware issues particularly common to these phones, and even their value when they launched in 2013, considering it cost only $100 more than the 5C, can only be seen as really good. This is the phone that sets the standard for every iPhone we've seen come since. This is the phone that raised the bar for long-term iPhone support, and why phones like the 6S would go on to get even greater software support in the future. The 5S is the phone that saw an unmatched fundamental shift in the iOS experience, one that still forms the very core of how our iPhones work today. And it even came with that new gold color.
These iPhones are packed with remarkable technologies, but we've done that in a way that really matters to people, making things easier and better for our users. We don't just pack in feature after feature. Instead, we think deeply about what kind of experience we want to create, and then create technologies that enable that experience.
7 years and 18 iPhones ago, we came to the exact same conclusion we've now arrived at today. And I think it is probable this is a phone that will never be beaten. In this modern world where smartphones are already so amazing, and there's far less room and incentive for innovation than in previous decades. A world where human creativity has been put on the back burner in favor of mediocre generative AI, something that Apple can't even get right. The same company that could arguably be credited, at least in part, for the rise of AI with Siri in 2011. The iPhone 5S was an iPhone in its purest possible form, the ultimate conclusion to every iPhone that had come before. And were it possible for a smartphone to be perfect, the 5S is certainly the closest we've ever seen. The iPhone 5S is the best iPhone ever, and it always will be. Oh, and here's that final tier list if you were curious. And so with that, I think we're right about done here. Am I shocked that the iPhone 5S ended up winning? No, not really. This is the exact same result as the last time we did this. I don't know what that says about both me and also Apple, because they haven't made a better iPhone since then. So I don't know. Honestly, I feel like they've been on mostly a downward trend, but I've talked plenty about that in the past. Links in the description to other related videos, by the way, and also, of course, Incogni. Thanks again to them for sponsoring this video. Coming into this, I was purposely trying to think of a reason that the 5S shouldn't win, that a different iPhone could win. The 5S just felt like the easy answer, you know, but I just don't see it. Everything about it was so well made, and the longevity and it was the quintessential iPhone, and that design too. I mean, hey, I know the iPhone 5 brought it first, but it's still beautiful and still probably the best Apple's ever done, maybe? Thank you so much for watching, and if you found this video interesting, please hit that like button. It took forever for me to make. Huge shout out to the channel members. Thank you guys so much for your support. It means the world to me, and it helps me do videos like this. I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and I will see you all next time.